To welcome Mrs. Paulia Lakija, the Director General of the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation. Please welcome her with a round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Center, the home of the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation. And welcome to Imagine Nigeria, facilitating a national narrative for Nigeria 2 years ago to honor the legacy of the late Shehu Musa Yar'Adua. His vision for an inclusive and prosperous Nigeria for all its citizens is what feeds our imaginations here at the Foundation. Outside in front of the building is his unfinished bridge, which represents his vision. The team here at the Foundation, they call themselves the Sustainers, are here to continue building this bridge as it arcs around, getting ever broader, higher, and wider. A part of our mandate is to be a convener of conversations, just like the one we're having here today. President and the UNDP for supporting this event and pushing the conversation on the national narrative. I must thank the Sustainers, Amara Nwakpa, Sayo Samuel Dada, Lewa Ejila, Nafisa Atiku Adejuwon, Zainab Ilyasu, and Abraham Agarite, our librarian and exhibition coordinator. Please do take time after today's event to visit the exhibition. Abraham will be the guy there to guide you. The exhibition uses the life of the late Shehu Yar'Adua as a springboard for conversations around the values he lived and died for, values such as courage, commitment, democracy, service, and unity. When I first saw this exhibition, I felt quite strongly that this was a great teaching tool with which to inspire all of Nigeria's young people. Imaginations need feeding. If our young people do not know the history of the country, if there is scant understanding of the situation we find ourselves in now, how are we equipping Nigeria's citizens to imagine a better future? There is an expression I use regularly, which is a bit ironic given today's weather. The expression is, a river that forgets its source will dry up. What are we doing to ensure that our river remains connected to its source? When I first saw the Imagine Nigeria report, I was thrilled. It represents a huge body of research and evidence and is structured in a way that lends itself to broader development and realization. And for those of you who know little about me, the very title speaks to my heart. I know it will speak to the heart of all those whose work falls between the arts, culture, creative economy, and civic spaces. Imagine Nigeria as a call to action and a challenge. It is a challenge that the Sustainers are very ready for, and we look forward to working with our partners to create ways in which to support the development of a robust ecosystem for such individuals and organizations that fall within this intersection, an ecosystem that is currently somewhat lacking. I must thank all our speakers who are responding to this call to action and who are joining this conversation with us today. I'm looking forward to hearing your responses to the Imagine Nigeria Challenge as we work together towards igniting imaginations in order to make sure our river will never dry up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your welcome address, Ma. Up next is Ms. Larry Shasori. I'm just going to give a brief introduction before she comes up. She is the Senior Special Advisor, Planning and Coordination from the Office of the Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria. She is a public policy specialist with a focus on policy design, measuring impact, and advocacy. Prior to her appointment, she served as Vice President, Corporate and Legal Services at Marine Power Limited. She also served as the Political Affairs Officer of the United Nations Program. She was the Program Coordinator for the Orderly Society Trust, Legal and Judicial Systems Officer for the United Nations, and a Political Affairs Officer of the United Nations Mission in Liberia. Larry has vast experience in building nonprofits, corporate social responsibility, and cultural programs. She holds a Bachelor of Law from Nigeria Law School, a master's degree in international law and legal studies from King's College London, and a postgraduate diploma in legal practices from the University of Law, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Buckingham. Please put your hands together for Ms. Larry Shasori.
Thank you so much, Shayo. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to speak for very long. I'd really just like to give you all context about why we're here. I know that we're quite delayed with our start time today. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much to the Yaradua Foundation for hosting this meeting, this conversation today. The Imagine Nigeria project was really born out of an opportunity to reflect in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. It presented an opportunity for reflection and also to press the reset button, I think, as so many people during that time did. It's an exercise and a project that's promoted by the federal government and UNDP, and basically what you're seeing here today is a result of 2 years of work, of study, of engagement, of research with a number of actors within the country, outside of the country, experts on Nigeria, people who are Nigerians, ordinary citizens across the country. And the purpose was really to consider global trends, consider opportunities for Nigeria in the future, for Nigeria's future, and to identify opportunities for Nigeria's success in the future. It resulted in a study, the Imagine Nigeria framework, which comprises the Imagine Nigeria study. Within that study, we identified 5 recommendations for Nigeria's future. And the first was that we identified that Nigeria needs to build a culture of innovation to be successful in the future. It needs to stimulate a green economy to be prepared for a post-oil world. Nigeria ought to lead Africa because it has done so in the past. It has the hard and soft power tools to do so. Nigeria ought to also build trust in society. To do this, to increase citizen engagement, to expand inclusion and participation of society throughout public life. And finally, Nigeria ought to build a national narrative. Basically, who do we say we are? What are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves? And it is our view, having identified these recommendations for the future, that these are the tools that we need for Nigeria to be successful. Right now, we are in the dissemination phase of the framework of the exercise. And what we're doing is identifying partners like the Yaradua Foundation to engage with them on various recommendations so that we can start to share this with all of society. The goal for the project, success for the project, is to have all of society engaged in implementing, in achieving these ideas for a successful future for Nigeria. So no matter where people are, whether they're in private sector, whether they're ordinary citizens, civil society, we very much like for people to engage with these various ideas wherever they may be, and so that we can start to have all of society working together, whether it's in government, private sector, in educational institutions and similar. So we hope that the conversation that we have today with our various speakers, with yourselves, will inspire. Again, inspire is such a vague word, but that's really, it does have its uses. We are hoping that it creates a spark, it creates an opportunity for people to engage and connect and make possible, really, and start to implement the calls to action that we hear today, that you'll see in the report, that you'll see on the website, imaginenigeria.ng. Yes, so that we can start to work together. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for your opening remarks, Ms. Larry Shasori. Up next, we'll be watching a film on exploring national narratives developed by the Imagine Nigeria initiative.
Nigeria is a very young nation, or a country, if you think about it, aspiring to become a nation. Less than 60 years, with over 300 different ethnic groups. our challenge or our journey of being able to trust each other and work with each other has come to a place now where we can really seriously have programs that gives us a grand narrative and a national compact that builds for our children a future of being able to talk to each other, to challenge government, to be productive in our creativity in such a way that when we disagree, we're able to find ways to do that without thinking that our nation will fall apart. That we can also bring the promise of a people who have centuries and generations of craft and capacity to bear in such a way that we make more than the sum of our parts. The promise of Nigeria is critical to the promise of Africa. Nigeria's leadership in the continent and its promise for the world, because it has one of the youngest populations, is going to be important. The set of activities that I certainly commend to you is for us to have these narratives captured, to have a socially cohesive framework of understanding, to use our diversity as a strength and a platform for a greater and better future for our children, their children, and the posterity to come. We will only achieve prosperity if we are able to use these incredible gifts, unique in the world, in such a way that we love what we are creating.
Up next, it's my pleasure to invite Hajiya Saudatu Madi, MFR, for her keynote address. Before she comes up, I'll do a brief introduction. Hajiya Saudatu is a 1978 graduate of Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, and has a postgraduate diploma from the Administrative College of Nigeria, graduating with distinction. She is the Secretary General of the Women's Rights Advancement and Protection Alternative, RAPA, a rights-based national nonprofit advocating for equity and equality of opportunities for women and girls in Nigeria. Under her leadership, RAPA has offered legal aid and counseling support to over 25,000 women across Nigeria, positively impacting the lives of abused women and girls. The organization is one of 7 recipients of the 2014 MacArthur Foundation Award for Creative and Effective Institutions. Under her leadership, RAPA has gained a positive reputation, expertise for touching the lives of women by increasing awareness and respect for women's human dignity, as well as positive shifts in institutions of faith and culture. In 2011, she was awarded the National Honor of MFR by the Federal Government of Nigeria in recognition of her contributions to the promotion and defense of women's rights. She has served on the Council of Nigeria's National Human Rights Commission as Deputy Secretary and as Deputy Secretary of the Northern States Governors Forum Committee on Reconciliation, Healing and Security. At the international level, she has served as Nigeria's advisor for the United Nations CEDAW Committee. She is also a founding member of the citizen-driven Bring Back Our Girls campaign, advocating for the rescue and return of Nigeria's abducted Chibok girls. She has contributed to Nigeria's national dialogue on the subject of identity and diversity in papers and presentation. She promotes a position on the legitimacy of diversity in negotiations for peaceful coexistence and as a positive trigger for national development. Please join me as we welcome Hajiya Saudatu Madi.
Thank you very much. Some of us are radically challenged. Good morning, and the protocols obviously respected. The Director General of the Sheikh Musa Yar'Adua Foundation, Mrs. Poli Alakija, the Office of the Vice President, and other people here present. Thank you for joining, and I want to welcome you. You know why I'm welcoming you. It's sad. I thought that the rains will allow us come in, because having a national narrative conversation is so critical to this country, especially at this time. However, and because I think this is also online, I believe many people will listen to us, and we'll have to find a way of getting them to listen and to hear what we see here today. Just before I start, please, I would like to ask 3 or 4 people to stand up. Can a Yoruba man stand up, please, or a Yoruba woman? Anybody, a Yoruba, an Igbo person, a Hausa person, please stand up. That's a Yoruba. Thank God for your cap. Which constituency do you represent, my brother? Yoruba. And there is Yoruba. Oh, you're a woman, gender. Eh? No, stand up, please. Where is a Hausa man? Where is Tashimana? Stand up. Hausa, yes? Okay. Please just move forward and look at the crowd. Just move forward kindly, please. We need to do this. I learned this from our elder statesman, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, our erstwhile President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, these are human beings, first and foremost. Second, they have their identities, which I believe is non-negotiable. But they have a commonality of humanness. They have a commonality of being Nigerians. So we're going to ask them to do something which we hope they will do very well. Please let the Yoruba man laugh in Yoruba for us. Can the Yoruba man laugh in Yoruba for us, please? The Igbo man laugh in Igbo for us, please. The Hausa man, can you laugh in Hausa, please? Okay, then can we all laugh then in the room? Can they all laugh with us? Can we all laugh? Let's all laugh, please. Let's all laugh, please. Please, let's all laugh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The wise elder statesman, in 2018, I was privileged to also present at the joint event of the Sheikh Musa Yar'Adua Foundation and the Olusegun Obasanjo Library. There again, we were talking about social cohesion, the role of gender, the role of youth, and how to take the nation forward, looking at the index of the human capital of men, women, and youth. And he did this thing, and it struck me, and from then on, I have tried to see how I can put it into practice. Nobody can laugh in his language. Laughter is laughter. Life is life. Human dignity is human dignity. There is no equation about it. There is no language to it. There is no creed or color. And this is the premise upon which I want to start my presentation. That for Nigeria to move and create a national narrative that enables cohesion, progress, development, peace, we need to be colorless to a certain extent. We need to be the same voice to a certain extent. And why do I say to a certain extent? Because in my person and in my individuality, I believe strongly that identity is non-negotiable. I remain a Hausa Fulani. I remain a Muslim. You remain Dukwe. You remain Moses. And Dukwe, Moses, and Saudatu will have to coexist because we are Nigerians. So on that premise, again, I say we need to look at what is the nexus between our current situation, which we are seeking to amend using common narratives, between the identity and the diversity it presents. Now, I think I had a presentation. I thought someone was supposed to put it up. Where is Liwa, please? Anyway, I'll continue. So as a background, I want to say, oh, thank you very much. So we can go to the next slide. Go on, you've just done this. Aha. So as a background, my take is that the crisis of identity and legitimacy of diversity is something that we as Nigerians need to begin to look, not as an English terminology, but as a fact of life. And as you can see, the poster we had says diversity is a fact. That is, we can't run away from being different. But inclusion, which then speaks to everybody being on the table, every voice matters, and every voice contributes, is an action. It's an act. It's a deliberate action that you take as an individual, I take as a collective, and we take as a nation. So one of the challenges that we are having, and in the background of our issues, is this crisis of identity and the legitimacy of diversity. Who says we cannot be different? If you go to the Bible, Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 33, Jacob had 12 sons. The offspring of each of these men became the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Although all the tribes are part of one nation, each tribe, that is the Shevets, has unique characteristics. And so when they are blessed by Jacob and later by Moses, each tribe received a different blessing in accordance with their individual nature and purpose. If you go to the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and I say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, O you men, we have created you of a male and a female and made you tribes and families that you may know each other. So it means being different is legitimate. Being diverse is legitimate from our Almighty Creator. It's not as if anybody sat the way they drew the map of Nigeria to draw that I must be Hausa, you must be Yoruba, he must be Igbo. No, this is from Almighty Himself. And He then had the wisdom of putting us in one box. Now, the next issue is how do we align as a background? The alignment of these diversities is the critical path that has eluded this country for the last probably 40 years. If we speak to the First Republic, we may claim some progress in the sense that because the regional governments carried this identity we're talking about, there was less rancor. But you can see coming towards 1966, we lost that. As such, it still became an issue of alignment. Then the other one, and I'm glad, Sharon, no, the name, yeah, yourself, please. She mentioned something about narratives, the language. I mean, I think it's the gentleman on the video. Narratives and documenting Nigeria's historical antecedents. What is an issue there for us as a background is that our attempts at creating narratives around our antecedents has had no central theme. If you go to certain countries of the world today, let's even take China, there is a deliberate doctrine of what their children are taught about their country. You cannot come from your village in that place and change that narrative. It's an indoctrination. The children begin from kindergarten to know this is China, China defeated this, China won this. They never speak to their children of the negative or their losses. They build them into growing up into children who feel proud, who are also proud to be Chinese. So ours is such that our antecedents have not been documented in a manner that makes it a teaching and a pride of place for our children as they grow up. Finally, there is an absence. I like the project, Imagine Nigeria. But can we see in the course of this project a shared concept of national cohesion? What national cohesion may mean to you may be different from what it means to me. And this is always with the backdrop of diversity. I'm different. No, I cannot be, no. Do we have a shared concept of when I'm a Nigerian? Because you meet a Nigerian in Brighton, in England, he's very happy he has seen his brother or his sister. But the moment you enter Ikeja, I mean, you land. He's asking you which direction are you going, you know? Are you going to Lagos or to Oyo? So outside of the shores of Nigeria, and I have read this in many other literature, that Nigerians have the capacity to bond outside of the shores of Nigeria. But once we return, we begin to ask which local government you are coming from or which, you know. So it's important that we now couch a national stake that says, come rain, come shine, Nigeria is this, Nigerians are this. I've had the privilege of representing Nigeria in some of the African Union conversations around the African Union Protocol on the Rights of Women. The smaller African countries will always listen to what Nigeria will say because they believe in the power of our voices. They believe in the power of our force. A Nigerian at that level will bragado, will do anything so that the position of Nigeria is heard and the position of Nigeria becomes the narrative for the other smaller nations. Why wouldn't we apply it internally? Next, please. Why do we have problems? I have just these 5, and they incorporate most of the things that people may list. We have legacy and legal and policy flips. I use the word somersault, but just to be respectful to my country, I changed the word to flips. With inconclusive outcomes, I don't know whether anybody takes the essence of that word, including your elections, they run inconclusively. Outcomes in managing stake and interests. It's the stake of Nigerians that every child is eligible for education. But our educational policy has lingered from A to B, B to C, back to A, and so on and so forth. Of course, the human capital of this country is where we will reside these narratives. And unless education is really what it is, pragmatic, practical, you know, empowering, then we miss the mark. Then we have distorted narratives inhibiting national cohesion. You say your own, me, I say my own. I hear you, you don't hear me. So where is the convergence? It's my story, your story, my way, or the highway. More often than not, the highway is the outlet for many conversations. We've seen people walk out of the national conference. We've seen people walk out of the National Assembly deliberations. We've seen people walk out of council meetings, even at local level when they can be sanctioned by juju or whatever. They will still walk out. So is it to say that unless my way works, then Nigeria won't work? Then we have growing landscape of conflict and unresolved tensions. I have had the privilege also of serving and reviewing all the conflicts in Nigeria from the year 1980 to the Boko Haram period. None of those conflicts has been resolved conclusively. Justice has not been met. And so there are brewing pains that keep getting multiplied and consolidated. Of course, if you want me to feel happy, right now one of the problems we have in the Northeast, particularly, is that we want to reintegrate insurgents. But we've not prepared the communities they offended. In fact, in some instances, you find they get more attention than the communities they have offended. And that, I'm not using big English, I'm using small English so that we can understand this matter. And you find that there is no way the person that killed my father can just come back, walk into the street, be empowered because we want him to throw away his gun. Communities cannot understand that. And so we've got to resolve it and ensure that people are living on terms that show justice to them, that they see justice being done, and that they accept as a way they want to live with each other and negotiate their peace and negotiate their wars. We also have insecurity undermining. This one is a gone thing. I don't even need to discuss it much. Then we have the one that really is bad, is shallow issue-based organizing that only feels, survival narratives. With all due respect to what we did at Occupy Nigeria, we lost it. That was one point in this country when the narrative could have been shaped about accountability. Thank God you are here. We've almost lost so many, in fact, even NSAS. We lost it because either it was too shallow, spontaneous, without structure, and without leadership. Because to change the kind of things we are talking to, there must be some form of structure, leadership, and commitment. Now, so overall, what are we missing? The agreed basis for our purpose, as reflected in our national constitution, is what we are missing. The purpose of promoting good government and welfare of all persons in our country on the principles of freedom, equality, and justice, and for the purpose of consolidating the unity of our people. That is the 1999 Constitution as amended. This is what we are missing. This is what we should yearn our national cohesion dictum around. This is what should inform us, because you can see all the key things: freedom of information, freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom to accumulate wealth, but not to steal Nigeria's common sovereignty. The equality, the power relations, and the considerations that mean justice is done when it should be done. And most importantly, why are we together as a nation? Now, can you go to the next slide, please? Some people have spoken to the major divisive issues we have. As you can see, again, I have picked out 7. Poor leadership and trust deficit. I'm glad someone has already spoken about the trust deficit between citizens and government. It is global. Let us have some peace there. It's global, but our own Warsaw. I beg, let's be truthful to ourselves. It is global. Everywhere there is a significant level of distrust between governments and citizens. However, where there is communication, where citizens feel government is transparently dealing with them, government makes them part of its processes, budget, it must be in the room, accountability lab is here. How much has government taken you on board to make you feel a part of its work, a beneficiary of its work, and most importantly, giving you the capacity to hold them accountable? So that trust deficit is, again, another divisive issue. As it is, some people, no matter what you say, a government is good because it is their own. Some people, no matter what you say, a government is bad because it is not their own. That's just a simple arithmetic about it. No isms, no nothing. Now, the next thing is political and financial power struggles. We know what this has done to this country. We know what this has done to this country. I think they said the PIB bill was in the National Assembly for over 20 years. Please, can I have water? It was in the National Assembly for over 20 years. The beauty of that act is yet to sink into Nigerians because there has been limited communication on what it means. For it to have taken that long and to arrive at the station it is today, I think Nigerians need to hear more why it is so important as to have it. What are the immediate benefits? What are the long-term benefits? And how can you locate yourself in those benefits? What will it do in terms of government revenue to ensure that the goods and services of democracy are delivered to your door? Those are the questions that that explanation must answer so that people trust government, people welcome the PIB, people support its implementation. Because it's paper unless Nigerians believe in it and unless Nigerians support its implementation. Then the cheap card, I call this the cheapest card, ethno-religious cards. It is right because today it is Katsina man, I'm from Katsina. Tomorrow it will be wrong because it will be your sister from Oyo State or from Enugu State. The ethno-religious card has been our greatest divisive issue in this country. We have not yet slept over Muslim ticket yet, go? It is still raging, but I don't know where it will end. And it goes to the next thing, that is legitimizing mediocrity and corruption. You go to your community because you've done so well in tipping your hand into the tillers of government, you get a chieftaincy title. you get land allocated to you. You abuse the chief. Nobody wants to talk because you are greasing everybody's palms. Then selective response to issue and distortion of narratives to justify negative actions or inactions. People are very ready to defend when somebody ought to speak in this country and he doesn't speak. No, if he speaks, whether he speaks or not, they will say he's still wrong. Let him speak now. At least let him give his heart the joy that he spoke. It is up to you as Nigerians to either believe him or not. But it is so important, thank you very much, that he speaks. Because if he decides to select what he responds to and when to, then he is not fulfilling the mandate we give as Nigerians. Number 7 is mobilizing without structure or leadership. I spoke to this last. This is so important because, again, the gains of mobilization such as NSAS, the mobilization such as Occupy Nigeria, Occupy NAS, BBOG, all are being lost because we lacked a structure or leadership, resulting in the poor outcomes and sometimes hijack of what we want to do. The next slide, please. So, how much does it cost us? We need to count the cost. The cost of all this is poor economic indices, loss of life, property, and unemployment, availing ample time for pundits to use the unoccupied hands of youth and teeming Nigerians. The trust deficit again comes in as a factor because government cannot be given the legitimacy it requires. People don't even want to have a discussion around whether it is doing well or not. It will not interface with citizens. And then there is huge spending to maintain security by an overstretched machinery and a weak accountability system around them. Then we have widespread post-traumatic stress disorder, leaving most of the population on edge. Every day I go back to Gwarimpa from Jabi. I see people who ordinarily should not be quarreling. They should not be quarreling. But because they waited long on the queue, no public transportation, they lack the money to imagine coming to work tomorrow, but they have to be at work at 7:30. Their boss comes and passes in front of them in a jeep, only him or her in the car. That's trauma. That's trauma enough. And that's why you have people fighting recklessly. For a small reason, the traffic will be delayed for 1 hour. Time lost. Nigerians have no sense of time use because they are here and they can waste all the time in the world to argue for rubbish. So everyone is traumatized, and because everyone is traumatized, we do not have the level of sanity to sit down and converse with each other respectfully and decently. We also have missed opportunities, like I spoke to earlier on. Because at every turn in a nation's history, there are opportunities. They may be painful opportunities, but if they are used properly, they end up being a benefit to all of humanity. So, having said all of this, what are the foundations for managing our diversities? First of all, we need to accept the principle that unity does not infer uniformity. It doesn't, when we say Nigerians should work towards unity, we're not saying that we should all be the same, men and women, boys and, Remain who you are, but look at who the other person is. Converse with the other person with dignity and respect so that you have a fair chance of being listened to as you listen to others. We also need to acknowledge the realities of the dynamics of balancing our pluralities. You saw this end, another one opens. But if there's a sincerity of purpose, if there's a unity of purpose, and if there's an end game to unity, we can be able to balance these things. Some countries have done it in worst case scenarios. When we argue about women's quotas, people tell me, yes, the small African countries have had it. Sierra Leone, South Africa, So one day I looked up my own colleagues. I said, they may have had it, but have you spoken to the ancestors of where they got it? And the women of Liberia, you know? I said, yes, have you spoken? We don't need a war for women to lose their husbands, to become the household heads before they are considered, you know, credible human beings to build their countries. We don't need that. And Nigeria does not need that above every other country in Africa. So I keep saying to people, our ability to balance, it's not an easy game. It's not English as I'm speaking. It's a difficult game, and you have to be sure that when you go in, you are going in deliberately, sincerely, and purposeful. And you are not going there to be a winner takes all, because it's a negotiation. Our conferences, political reform conferences, whatever, a lot of them did not give us the meat of what we are looking for, because many of the groups went in with agendas. And when the agenda doesn't work, Shikena is the highway. We need to also learn that the art of managing diversity rests on consensus building. It rests on negotiations. It also rests on security of thought. If I think having to live with my Christian brother in this way or in that way, will I be vilified by other Muslims for having my best friend as a Christian? So that fear, that lack of confidence of my choices also limits people and makes a foundation for us to be able to manage our diversities. Because if I have confidence that what I do is towards building Nigeria, not my individuality, then that should not be an issue. Then we have to agree on the purpose and content of our unity for collective good. In terms of reality, I think we've spoken enough English. Let me just give you a picture. The next slide, please. Now, I sampled these three situations so that I can ground home the argument we are making about identity, diversity, and individual decision-making. The first one is a father's leap of faith, and it has to do with my education in a missionary school. I went to secondary school in 1969. I went to a Catholic missionary secondary school. My dad was one of the social classifications of Kaduna Mafia, and he could afford the fee, which was about 60-something pounds. But the narrative that would have stopped him from taking me there was that it's a Christian school, they are going to convert us. A lot of the Hausa families that didn't want their daughters to go there used this narrative to discourage the enrollment of their daughters in these schools. We know what mission schools did in this country, whether Muslim mission schools or Christian mission schools. There is no comparison with any standard of education today in this country. And I beg to be, what is it called, controverted. So when he took me there, that was my first engagement with diversity. I was sheltered. I knew, of course, there were Yorubas. I knew Igbos because our driver was an Igbo man. But I didn't know these other things that come around diversity. It was, the first shock I got was my hair had to be cut. But my dad decided, it's for cleanliness. He didn't give it the other way to say anya abang arana, or say, you know, these things. The other thing he did was to tell me every action, every activity in the school is a school activity. It's not a church activity. So we will come back from prep, we will sit and, we'll kneel and pray. We'll go to the convent. We will stand at 12 noon for Angelus. And to make matters deeper, there was no IRS in the school. I had to do Bible studies for my WAEC. WASC, we didn't call it WAEC, it's now that it's WAEC, WASC. So as far as I'm concerned, the kind of ambivalence my dad brought for me, introducing me to diversity, very hard way, because it's a boarding house. I can't go back and complain. And then it was at the verge of the end of the Nigerian Civil War. These big, big girls from the southeast were in the school, and we were tiny little girls. So even that disparity was something I had to visualize and manage with time. And then, of course, we had punishment in the school. You will climb a tree and watch my dad will never listen to that. So why I'm speaking to this as an experience is because the narratives we now give our children are so negative. They so differ. As a nursery school child today is talking of a Christian and a Muslim, is talking of a Hausa and Igbo. So where is Nigeria you want them to build for themselves? You will go. You better help them build a good Nigeria that they can live in. The next is the negotiated narratives developed by RAPA and CSOs, which help to manage the sensitive adultery cases of Safia Husseini, Amina Lawal. In reality, it was a quest for justice, but the narrative was an affront to Islam. Some of us were castigated. In fact, yours truly here had to move out. I had to move out at some point. Because rather than see it as a quest for justice, which is a cardinal principle of Islam, justice, it was seen as an affront to Islam. So again, if you decide to to couch your narratives around things that ignite emotions or sensibilities, then you are unlikely to make the day. The third one is a narrative of citizen organizing to demand government accountability. This is the Chibok movement. At that time, we were accused of doing it because we wanted to topple the government. We were accused of taking money from them. And this is the one movement in this country that we can beat our chests and say we didn't take a kobo from any Nigerian, inside or outside of the country. But the narratives were different. And so the response to us, even the parents of these girls at some point became divided of whether to believe us or not to believe us. So can you see us hurting ourselves? As far as I'm concerned, all that you have heard about these three cases are replicable, but it depends on what you take it as a person. The next thing is just quickly go through the responsibility of response. Who needs to respond? Government. We'll keep saying government. We'll keep saying government. But civil society and authorities also at the grassroots level need to support positive narratives. We have the means and the measures. Tales by moonlight, grandmas and grandpas, storybooks. Only that, unfortunately for us, we took off history from our curriculum. So when we've taken off history. It is now social, they call it social studies. Where is your history? Why won't you tell your history by yourselves? Why should they have to go to the archives of the National Library to read who Tafawa Balewa or who Zik was? They should hear it every day. They should be their role models for nationalism. They should be their role models for patriotism. But where are they? I'm sure now if you go to some of these highbrow schools, some of them may not even know these names. So who is losing? We are losing. We need to have professional and alert law enforcement institutions. All the things about Ametikun is just expressions of wishes. It is not going to address the security and the negotiations we need to do around peace and conflict. We need to organize issue-based. If we want, we have to organize issue-based platforms for agitation. We also need citizen-led platforms and movements delivering constructive and objective programming. Still, in terms of responsibility, we need to review formal and informal education. We've spoken to education. We need zero tolerance for derogatory or offensive language and availing victims' remedy. Many of the problems in this country go back to how we speak to each other. Some tribes are labeled one name or the other. Some groups are labeled one name, and they are all derogatory. Thank God, I think there's a conscious move away from that. At least we've started respecting each other. A lot of us, yes, we have. Don't be pessimistic, my dear. We have started respecting each other. Because we don't have anybody else to respect or to respect us. So push comes to shove, I must live with you. Abi? So zero tolerance to this derogatory, and then we must shame our conflicts of merchant. We must shame our conflicts of merchants of conflict. They are the ones who are embedded in your household, in your community, in your local government, in your state. They are there at all levels. What they used to do was they will tell you that, no, but they will not listen to you unless it is me who speaks to them. But we've seen them, we've called their bluff. Now people are engaging directly with stakeholders at community level, particularly civil society. So we need to, shame them, identify them, and repel them strongly too. Then we need to sustain our collective resolve. And then corporate organizations and professional associations finance. I was just hearing the thing about Imagine Nigeria project. Without the federal government, would Imagine Nigeria continue with the same zeal and purpose? It needs other sources of funding and commitments. As such, one of the things that you can do to ensure that this narrative creation, these things continue, is to involve everybody, including the private sector. By way of conclusion, my sisters and brothers, I would say there is no loss in sustained dialogue. Nobody loses in a dialogue. Everybody gains. It may be a painful process because it provides the space for exchange to build consensus and positive narratives on the inherent diversities we share, either by nature, because I'm a woman and you're a man, or because of the social constructs that we all are defined by. We must be willing to continue to negotiate gains, pains, and to forgive and move forward for the good of all. Being Africans, let me leave you with these 3 proverbs which have shaped my personal orientation in responding to or assessing the trappings of diversity in my work or relationships. The first one says, sometimes it is good for us to act blind. That was the first lesson I learned on leadership from my grandfather. That a leader needs to look away sometimes. And even you as a follower, you need to look away sometimes. So act blind and ignore one another's shortcomings in order to be happy and to move forward. The second is, it is also said, no matter how many times the teeth bite the tongue, they still stay together in one mouth. That's the spirit of forgiveness. For us as Nigerians, there is nowhere to go. Nobody will accommodate 200 million refugees. Nobody. So we are here for the long haul. Yes, we're here for the long haul. So we better make it between the teeth and the tongue. Nobody can move out. Now, the final one is, even though the eyes don't see each other, they see things together. They blink simultaneously, and they cry together. That is unity. Ladies and gentlemen, may God grant Nigerians the spirit of forgiveness, togetherness, and unity of purpose to reclaim and sustain a virile and productive nation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
Please, can we give Hajiya Saudatu another round of applause? I hope that her address actually inspired us, because I'm personally inspired. Just before we go to the next item on the agenda, I'd like to just point out how her address explored the issues and the factors that are driving divisive behaviors in Nigeria. And then she also told us about the associated costs and the missed opportunities that we've had. And I hope that that resonates with all of us today. And then what I loved most was, practical strategies for moving forward for a cohesive Nigeria. Please, another round of applause for Hajiya Saudatu. Thank you. Up next, we have Moki Makura, who is the Executive Director of Africa No Filter. She'll be joining us virtually to deliver her keynote address.
Okay. Looks like I'm on now. Hello, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. My name is Moki Makura, and unfortunately I cannot be there today. I am speaking to you from South Africa, which is where I'm currently based. I've been asked to speak for 15 minutes about building narratives. And this is something that I do every day. I lead an organization called Africa No Filter that is working to shift some of the harmful and stereotypical narratives that exist about Africa today. So when I was asked to speak to this exciting project. I find this Imagine Nigeria project a very exciting initiative, and one that I think a lot of countries should consider. I was very excited because this is what we do. So I'm going to start my talk with a story. In 2008, I wrote a book called Africa's Greatest Entrepreneurs, and in it I featured 16 of the continent's greatest entrepreneurs, in my opinion. It was just the story of how they made it, the ups and the downs, leading to the success they had today. And over the years, this book was written in 2008, over the years, many people have come up to me and told me how this story or that story, influenced them, inspired them, caused them to do something. But just last week, a young man came up to me after I spoke at another conference, and he said, this book changed my life. Nobody had ever said that to me before. The book has inspired people, but he said, this book changed my life. And the reason why it changed his life was that as a result of reading one of the stories of entrepreneurs, he literally followed everything they did, almost step by step. And today, he said, he was incredibly successful. He had his own business, and he was, in his opinion, possibly one of the greatest entrepreneurs in Africa. And I tell you that story not because I want you to know I've written a book, but because I realize how important stories are. Stories build trust. They inspire people to do better, to do more. And in this case, that story led up to a narrative. It's interesting that two of the pillars of this Imagine Nigeria campaign are trust and narrative, both of which are linked to storytelling. And I'm going to tell you what our definition of the word narrative is, because I think we've heard it a lot today from the excellent speaker who came before me. The definition of narratives for us that we use at African Filter is that they are a collection or system of stories that are articulated over time, and they come to represent a central belief or central idea. The reason why narratives matter and why there is a pillar dedicated to this work is that this narrative or this belief or idea, it actually informs your worldview. It also informs how you behave, your actions. And if you look at a macro level, because I think we've been looking at a very sort of internal Nigeria level, if you look at a much bigger perspective, narrative or central beliefs or ideas about things impact two things: how the world sees us as Africans, as Nigerians, but also how we see ourselves. To give you an example, the impact of narrative, the things that people believe about us in Africa, informs the trade policies that dictate how the world trades with us. It informs the aid policies, how the world gives donor aids to us. It impacts business. It impacts investment. The belief of what Nigeria is or what Africa is informs how we invest. And in fact, I think Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, spoke at the United Nations General Assembly last week, saying how the perception about Africa means that the cost of doing business and the cost of investment and the cost of money in Africa is much higher than it needs to be because of the perception of a broken continent or corruption or whatever it is. The second thing that narrative impacts, or this central belief or idea impacts, is how we see each other. That's the reason why we have movements like Japa, why there are a lot of economic migrants leaving the continent, leaving Nigeria, because they don't believe there is an African dream, but they believe in the American dream. So narrative matters. And because we understand how narratives evolve, through stories told over time, we need to work on changing the story of Nigeria. You know, African Filter exists to change narratives. We're funded by a number of US and UK organizations. But when we started the organization 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, one of the first things we needed to establish, what were the existing narratives? What were the things the world believed about about the continent. And because we are doing this not for a country, we're doing this for a continent. So there's a lot of sort of breadth and scope to the questions we asked. We looked at over 60 research documents, reports, articles that have been written about the media coverage and the stories about Africa. And we found that there were 5 key ways, 5 key frames that dictated how most stories were told about Africa. The first one is poverty. The continent is poor. Nigeria is poor. So many of the stories are told through that lens, regardless of the facts or the data. The second thing is around poor leadership. So much of our coverage and storytelling about Africa relates to what our leaders are doing, what Buhari is doing, what Macky Sall is doing, what our leaders are doing. And a lot of it talks about the leadership. And sometimes there's faults in the way we're being led. But when that becomes the only focus, it becomes a problem. The third frame is around corruption. So many stories around business. In fact, if you go up to people in South Africa, which are based, they're scared to come to Nigeria to do business because they think it's corrupt. Again, perception, story. The fourth frame is conflict. So much of the continent's story is told through the lens of conflict. Even when we talk about elections, it's never just about elections. It's about the political conflict that's associated with elections. A few years ago, we had NSAS in Nigeria, conflict. It fed the narrative, and it was an important story, but the way it was told, it was completely stereotypical. And the fifth and final frame that we found is disease. We talk a lot about, when Ebola hit Africa, it happened in 3 countries, but, the world saw it as something that, if you went to Africa, you're going to catch Ebola. There's malaria we're dealing with, there's HIV, there's TB, there's, so much of our storytelling is told through that lens. And it led us to the realization that there's 3 main narratives, 3 main central ideas around the way the world sees Africa, and actually how Africans see ourselves. The first, that the continent is broken. Nigeria is broken. The second is that we are dependent on outsiders to save us. And the third is that we lack the agency and the ability to create the change that we need. So that's what we were working with when we started. But when we set up African Filter, there's a couple of things that we realized that we could do. Apart from getting the data, and we've done a lot more reports. We've done reports on the narratives around doing business in Africa. We've done reports around how African media covers Africa, because we are equally complicit as Africans. We've also looked at how US media covers Africa. So, sorry, I'm going to cough, just excuse me. So, apart from the research we do, there are 3 key things that we do. The first is, because we know, also through research, that the only way to counter negative stories of corruption, of conflict, of disease, is not to tell people that there is no corruption, no conflict, or no disease, because that doesn't work. What we know is that to counter these stories is you need to introduce new stories, different stories. So that's what African Filter does. We are lucky enough that we are a funder. We are funded by US and UK foundations, and we give grants to catalyze content, to create stories, or to build and strengthen the ecosystem of storytelling so that there are more stories coming out. One of our biggest projects is Bird, which is a news agency that essentially puts out stories that we want to see about Africa. One of the reports we did showed that actually there was less than 4% of the stories that Africans were reading about each other were linked to arts and culture or features. We were reading politics, we were reading negative news about each other. So the first thing we do is we catalyze more storytelling. The second thing is that we're trying to build a community around narrative change, because we know that we are not the only ones doing it. And there's lots of individuals who care about the stories that are told, or how their country or community comes across. And the final thing that we do is that we're a watchdog. somebody somewhere has to remind people that no, it's not okay to talk about Nigeria, about the continent like this, that we are more than the sum of these stories. And that's something that we do. We do it by pointing, stories out that are inaccurate, even though we know it doesn't necessarily work. It's being that watchdog and pointing things out, I think is really important, just so people can know that they shouldn't be doing it, they can't necessarily get away with it. So I'm going to just bring myself around to the final point I want to make here, which is really around what this amazing campaign, what Imagine Nigeria could look like, based on the lessons that African Authority has learned from this work and doing 2 years of this work. The first is that we need evidence, we need data, we need to do research. We need to know what stories are people hearing about Nigeria right now. Who is telling them? Is it Nigerian media? Is it CNN, Al Jazeera? What's happening on social media? Ambassadors, or who are the people who are saying Nigeria is not working? There's a lot of information that we need in order to be able to tackle the challenge, because it starts with the stories. It starts with the things that people say. So that's the first thing. The second thing we need to do is what African Authority does, which is to figure out how we start telling stories that reflect the national narrative that we want. And we've heard from our previous speaker about unity, which is a really important one. But there's so much more to Nigeria. Creativity, innovation. So how do we get these stories out there? Because as we say, we have to start telling them, because we understand the power of stories. We have the Nigerian news agency, for example. How are we using that organization to tell stories? We need to advocate to media to promote stories that equally reflect Nigeria. When you think about the biggest Afrobeat stars, when you think about the biggest football stars, when you think about some of our fashion designers, they're all sitting right there, not here, right there in Nigeria. How often do we write about them? How often do we celebrate and glorify them, both in Nigeria and locally? So we need to focus on finding and identifying the stories that feed the narrative we want. The last thing that we need to do is look at new initiatives. Because as many stories as you can tell, if things fundamentally don't change, and that's some of the things that the previous speaker was talking to about the way we see each other, we need to change certain things. And I feel there's a new campaign, a new initiative, a new moment that we can create to bring people behind, a new national or nation building moment. If you look like countries like Ghana, Ghana did something similar with the year of return, sort of galvanized a lot of people to come back to Ghana, made it easy, put on entertainment for them, made it a moment in time for them to come back. You look at a country like South Africa, where I sit. Some years ago, they embarked on the Proudly South Africa campaign, where if you were a South African company, we bought your products over in foreign products. There was a sticker you put on your product to say Proudly South African. We were proud, or they were proud, to be South African, to purchase South African goods. And I think some nation building public exercise that we can bring people behind is important. Just talking about stories, there were 2 stories recently that have been in the media about Nigeria, because I did a quick Google. One was around the new airline. That's kind of positive news you want to hear. There's a new airline, fresh new spirits, bringing Nigeria, because we know Nigerians love to travel. So a story like that was really reassuring. The other one was more of a negative one, and it was in Bloomberg. And it said, bankers fleeing Nigeria's stagnating economy as Japa beckons. And the reason why I give these 2 examples is the feeling that both of them make me feel. The bankers fleeing Nigeria's stagnating economy makes me feel I don't want to come to Nigeria. And actually, if I'm there, I too need to get out, because what are those bankers seeing that I'm not seeing? The second one, which is much more positive, makes me think an airline is coming. Great, I'm going to be able to travel. I'll be able to do business, internationalize my business, be able to do more things. It's more inspirational. And that's what I mean, the power of storytelling. It helps me decide on how I'm going to act. And I'm going to conclude now with actually 2 things. On social media, very recently, in fact, last couple of days, there's a man called Mr. Nigeria who is the most patriotic individual I've ever come across. His house is green and white, his car is green and white, he wears green and white clothing, and he's incredibly positive about Nigeria. And when he was asked why, he said, because Nigeria treated me right. And apparently, Nigeria sent him to university at some stage in his career. They paid for his university, so he's forever indebted. And I use that story because there was a quote at the beginning of the Imagine Nigeria report. It was from a young lady, one of the, I think, 300 people who've been endlessly in love with Nigeria. More importantly, I want Nigeria to fall in love with me. That's ultimately what narrative change means. Sorry. Sorry. That's ultimately what narrative change can bring. It can bring a population of expat Nigerians and Nigerians living in Nigeria to fall back in love with Nigeria. And on that, I will end my talk. Thank you very much for the platform and for the opportunity. And once again, I believe Imagine Nigeria is an amazing project.
A very big thank you to Moki Makura, the Executive Director of Africa No Filter. Just for the benefit of some of us that came in during her address, she explored how we can harness the power of stories to change Nigeria's national narratives. And talking about stories, up next is Dike Chukwumerije, who is going to be giving us a presentation. But before he comes up, I'm just going to do a brief introduction about him. He is a Nigerian spoken word and performance poetry artist and an award-winning author. He has 8 published books to his name, including the novel Orichindere, which won the 2013 Association of Nigerian Authors Prize for prose fiction and a poetry theater production. He is a member of the vibrant Abuja Literary Society and the host of the group's Book Jam and Poetry Slam. He has won several poetry Grand Slams in Nigeria, including the maiden edition of the African Poets Grand Slam competition. Since 2013, he has hosted and directed the annual Night of the Spoken Word Performance Poetry event as part of a movement to insert performance poetry into Nigeria's mainstream pop culture. Dike is one of Nigeria's most prolific performance poets, with successful poetry videos, a poetry show and theater production, the Made in Nigeria Poetry Show, that has been successfully staged 7 times. His shows are now among the most anticipated events in Abuja, creatively fusing entertainment and a call for reawakening of our national consciousness. Please, a big round of applause for Dike Chukwumerije.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk about Nigeria in a different sort of way. The River Niger is an enigmatic river. It's born in the highlands of Guinea-Conakry. It's born a few short kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean. Typically, rivers flow to the sea. Typically, rivers flow south. But the River Niger is one of those rivers of the world that breaks these conventions and begins its life by flowing away from the sea. It begins its life by flowing north towards the Sahara Desert, where it then makes a U-turn at the edge of the Sahara Desert and follows a long, winding path to the sea. So the River Niger is shaped like a very loose U. The unconventional path the River Niger chooses to take is the driving force for West African civilization. Because if you study the history of this region, you will see that so many of the iconic pre-colonial West African states developed in or around the River Niger basin. So the River Niger has had the same civilizational impact in this region as the Nile has had in North Africa, or the Zambezi in South Africa, or the Tigris and Euphrates in the Middle East, or the Yangtze in China, or the Tiber in Europe. Because everywhere in the world, great rivers tend to give birth to great nations. And it is not different here in West Africa. The River Niger is the live wire, is the life of West African civilization. And that is the river that Nigeria is named after. And for good reason too, because that river has very deep connections to the area that is today Nigeria. Here in Nigeria, the River Niger gathers to itself a great number of tributaries. A tributary is a river that flows into another river. So almost all our rivers in Nigeria, from north to south, east to west, Christian or Muslim, almost all our rivers in Nigeria, from River Sokoto in the northwest to River Mambala in the southeast, from River Focados in the south-south to River Gongola in the northeast, almost all our rivers connect to the River Niger. It is also here in Nigeria that the River Niger meets its greatest tributary, and that's the River Benue. It is also here in Nigeria that the River Niger, after its long, epic journey from Guinea, it is here in Nigeria that the River Niger finally meets the Atlantic Ocean. And that is the river Nigeria is named after. A river that is characterized by the unconventional path it takes, a river that is characterized by the great impact it has on civilization and culture in this region, and a river that is characterized by the great number of other rivers it draws to itself. That is the river Nigeria is named for. A river that is characterized by its unconventionality, or if you like, its creativity, by its impact, and by the sheer diversity of rivers it gathers to itself. That is the river Nigeria is named after. And in African culture and mythology, naming always has some spiritual significance. We believe that a person, a name, connects the person named to the energy of the person or thing or event for which he or she is named. So within the African worldview, we don't think it is abnormal to see a person begin to exhibit the characteristics of that person, event, or thing for which that person is named. So in this context, it is not surprising to see Nigeria exhibiting some of the characteristics of the River Niger. It is not surprising to see Nigerians exhibiting such high levels of unconventionality, or if you like, creativity. It is not surprising to see Nigerian movies and music and art having such impact on regional, continental, and global culture. It is not surprising to see Nigeria gathering within itself such a vast array of peoples, languages, and cultures, just like the River Niger. It is not surprising to see Nigeria displaying high levels of creativity, impact, and diversity. And these concepts, creativity, impact, diversity, geography, they are not random, they are intricately linked. You see, our impact on the global stage, that soft power we have, the wave that Nigerian culture makes, our impact on the global stage is driven by our creativity. Our creativity, in turn, is driven by our diversity. And our diversity is rooted in our geography. You see, we exist in a geographical location that is conducive to the flourishing of diversity and the manifestation of high levels of creativity. Do you know why? It is because we exist at a crossroad. We exist at that junction where North, West, and Central Africa meet. We exist at that junction where West Africa's longest river meets with its greatest tributary. And you see, rivers are also roads. Rivers are also trade and travel routes. So we exist at that junction where several trade and travel routes meet. Nigeria exists at a natural crossroad. This is a geographical fact that precedes Lord Lugard. It precedes Flora Shaw. It precedes Usman Dan Fodio. It precedes Jaja of Opobo. It precedes Kotal Kanta, it precedes Iwari the Great, it precedes Ezenri, it precedes Oduduwa. From time immemorial, the area that is today Nigeria has always sat at a natural crossroad. And wherever you find a crossroad, wherever you find a place where different roads meet, wherever you find a place where people and ideas, languages and cultures, goods and services are free to interact, intersect, and intermingle, there you will find a melting pot. There you will find a flourishing diversity. There you will find the manifestation of some of the highest levels of creativity possible to the human spirit. Because diversity is a natural driver of human creativity. And that is why this area that is today Nigeria, sitting as it does on a natural crossroad, has always, through history, been the scene of some of the most ingenious expressions of creativity in art, culture, and political engineering. No be today. It is not a fluke that the earliest known sophisticated civilization in sub-Saharan Africa arose here, the Nok civilization, near that junction between the Niger and the Benue. It's not a fluke. It is not a fluke that so many of the iconic, innovative, multicultural states of pre-colonial West Africa, so many of them from Kanem Borno to Benin, from the Hausa city states to Oyo, as so many of them congregate in this area that is today Nigeria. It is no fluke. From the ancient iron smelting furnaces of Nsukka to the fine terracotta sculptures of ancient Kaduna, from the bronze working civilization of Igbo to the lost cast wax techniques of Benin and Ife, this geographical location, through history, has always been conducive to the flourishing of creativity. It is a geographical fact that precedes Bobby Benson. It precedes Fela. It precedes the Mandators. It precedes Burner. Because wherever you find a crossroad, wherever you find a place where peoples and cultures, languages and values, goods and services can interact, intersect, and intermingle freely, there you will find a melting pot. There you will find a flourishing diversity, and there you will find some of the greatest expressions of creativity possible to the human spirit, because diversity is a natural driver of creativity. And that is why some of the two most fundamental assets we possess as a modern nation today is, one, our geographical location, and two, our diversity. But you see, in this life, it is not strange for your greatest strength and your greatest weakness to be two sides of the same coin. This is not strange at all. And that is why you will discover that the same geographical location that makes us a natural crossroad and has served us so well through history is the same geographical location that made us so vulnerable to all the slave trades that afflicted the African continent. Nigeria is the only country, or one of the few, I think it's the only one, but I'm still to verify, where all the three historic slave trades passed through Nigeria because of our location. Particularly the most recent one, the transatlantic slave trade, with its devastating impact on the psyche of the modern African. Likewise, the same diversity that makes us so inspiring in some areas is the same diversity that makes us so uninspiring in others. The same diversity that makes us so ingenious when it comes to art, sports, business, is the same diversity that makes us so problematic when it comes to civic engagement, to electioneering, to voting, to the mechanics of putting a competent government in place. The same diversity that lifts us up when it comes to creative entrepreneurship is the same diversity that drags us down when it comes to politics. You see, diversity is both a blessing and a curse. The blessing, enhanced creativity. The curse, enhanced difficulty in getting people of different tribes and tongues to see eye to eye. Diversity is our greatest asset, and diversity is our greatest liability. And that is why the most critical question we must answer in order to unlock our future as a nation is, how do we manage our diversity effectively? Anyone who has no real answer to that question cannot lead this nation into its full potential. Because at its core, development is not about building roads and bridges. At its core, development is not about tinkering with macroeconomic policy. At its core, development is about crafting a narrative that allows a group of disorganized people to unlock the potential in their collectiveness. That's what development is at its core. And our history as a nation has already gifted us with the beginnings of that narrative. Now, I know that all of us here were raised to study our history with the eye for spotting difference. But if you rearrange your brain and begin to study our history with the eye for spotting connections, you will see that our history has already gifted us with the key for managing our diversity effectively. And what is that key? That key is found in 3 broad principles that are personified by the 3 principal statesmen that negotiated the independence of this modern nation. And what are these 3 broad principles for managing our diversity effectively? 1, the principle of respect. We must always approach our ethno-religious differences with respect. The fact that I do not talk like you, or look like you, or dress like you, or eat like you, or worship like you does not mean that I am inferior to you. You must never assume that your cultural ways are in and of themselves better than my cultural ways. And I must not assume that my religious practices are in and of themselves better than your religious practices. If it matters to you, then for that reason it should matter to me. And if it matters to me, then for that reason it should matter to you. The things that we hold as precious as individuals must never be casually brushed aside in any conversation about our shared future. This is what the Sardowner, Sir Ahmadu Bello, meant when he responded to Zeke, who is reported to have said to him, "Let's forget our differences." And to this, the Sardowner responded and said, "No. Let us understand our differences. For understanding is the root of respect." Number 1, the principle of respect. Number 2, the principle of autonomy. We must give our differences space to breathe. That means that I must have a space that I can, to the most part, arrange as I want. And you must have a space that you can, to the most part, arrange as you want. Our society does not have to be a monologue. Our society does not have to be one song, one color, one dress, one tribe, one religion, one way of doing things. No. Our society should reflect the natural world around us, where diverse ecosystems and life forms come together to make life possible on this blue planet. Like this, we must evolve a system that does not automatically penalize anybody simply because he or she comes from a different tribe or religion. Like this, we must evolve a system that allows all flowers the space they need to bloom. This is why Chief Obafemi Awolowo, all his life, was an advocate for a federal system of government, for a system of government in which every identity group would have some type of autonomy at some level of society. This is why he was a lifelong advocate for federalism, for a system of government that would allow our differences the space we all need to breathe. Number 2, the principle of autonomy. Number 3, the principle of convergence. No matter how diverse we are, we must have points of convergence. No matter how different we are, we must have a basic set of issues, values, and perspectives that bring us together. Because ultimately, underneath our ethnocultural differences, we share the same geographical space. We share the same socioeconomic realities. We share the same basic humanity. For when all is said and done, the hunger of a poor homeless boy in Maiduguri is no different from the hunger of a poor homeless boy in Lagos. When all is said and done, the pain of living in a society where the rights of the minority and the non-indigenous are not respected, that pain is as sharp for a Muslim woman trying to make a home in Enugu as it is for a Christian man trying to make a home in Katsina. When all is said and done, the bullet an extremist fire will not ask you, are you a Christian or are you a Muslim, before piercing through your heart. We have so many problems we share in common, and we cannot afford to discriminate between ourselves, amongst ourselves, when trying to evolve solutions to these shared problems. This is what Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe meant when he said that there must be a set of laws to which all Nigerians are subject and a body of rights to which all Nigerians are entitled. These three principles, the principle of respect, the principle of autonomy, and the principle of convergence, together constitute the ideology behind the concept of one Nigeria. This is what one Nigeria means as originally conceived by our founding fathers. To build a nation bound, not in oppression, not in chains, but in freedom. This is the ideology that will allow us to manifest cultural pride without degenerating into tribalism. This is the ideology that will allow us to express our ethnocultural differences without losing the capacity for collective action as one black nation. This is the ideology that will allow us to remain diverse, fiercely and proudly so, without losing the huge benefit of standing together as one African people at this remarkable crossroad on the African continent, where West Africa's longest river finally meets the sea. I tell you, it is a blessing to be the member of an ethnic group that is indigenous to this geographical location, because this geography has gifted all of us who are indigenous to it with a capacity to conquer at the world stage. But all we need to realize that potential is to master these principles for managing our diversity successfully. Now, permit me to end this presentation with a very short poem inspired by the Nigerian coat of arms and titled The Nigerian Dream. It is because our earth is rich and yields its wealth to those who touch its soil with love and discipline. That is why our flag is green. Because we see the eagle rise above the dark and stormy skies, it serves to remind us all of the benefits of standing tall. Because the horse will show no fear the day that war is drawing near, it shows how for our dignity we too must fight courageously. Because the lines of tribe and tongue are not the lines of right and wrong. Our rivers both meet peacefully to give us faith in unity. These are the dreams we had at dawn, the hopes that saw our nation born, ideals that slumber deep within the colors of the green, white, green, the lofty heights that history saw, the future that it reached out for, the proof that they believed that we could someday be a great country. It is because we have this chance to make and mold our circumstance, to stretch and touch that distant height. That is why our flag is white. Thank you.
Please give Dike Chukwumeje another round of applause. Thank you so much for that inspiring presentation. What I took from it was respect, autonomy, and convergence. And so I urge all of us to think about what we've heard today and let it shape our behavior in the future. Thank you very much. Up next, we have an academic perspective on evolving a national narrative for Nigeria. And this will be given by Dr. Olajumoke Yacob Haliso. She is an associate professor of political science at Babcock University in Nigeria. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Ibadan, and her research over the years has explored the positions of women in conflict and post-conflict situations in Africa. This is with a particular focus on refugee and displacement concerns. She has conducted extensive fieldwork in Nigeria, Liberia, and Geneva, and has also researched broader issues in relation to the comparative politics of African states. Dr. Jacob Haliso is a recipient of various research grants and fellowships on the African continent and beyond. This includes the UN University for Peace Africa Program, the International Development Research Center, the American Political Science Association, the African Association of Political Science, to name a few. Dr. Jacob Haliso currently serves as the acting dean of the Veronica Adeleke School of Social Sciences at Babcock University, where she also teaches courses in international relations, peace and conflict studies, and comparative politics. She will be joining us virtually today. Please, a round of applause for Dr. Jacob Haliso.
Okay, am I audible now? All right. Good morning, everyone. And it's my pleasure to be here with you at this very important conversation. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of this program. With due respect to the Director General of the Foundation, Mrs. Pauli Alakija, greetings to Ms. Lanre Shashiri of the Office of the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the keynote speakers that have spoken before me, including that fantastic presentation by DK. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is an important occasion in which we've been invited to imagine Nigeria by facilitating a national narrative for this stuttering so-called giant of Africa. I will begin by just referring to 2 or 3 current incidences that I think exemplify some of the challenges that have brought us to this table today. It's a bit difficult to speak after the first 3 excellent presentations because then they've said everything, but perhaps we can look at things from 1 or 2 additional perspectives. I want to call our attention to the recent victory of Toby Amuson. I'm sure you all remember her, the young athlete who won the women's 100-meter hurdle competition in the World Athletics Championship, bringing Nigeria's first gold medal in that tournament. National pride swelled across the globe, at home and abroad in the diaspora. All Nigerians were excited, and even more so when Toby's victory collided with Keith Daniels' Uga popularity. And it was just a starting moment in imagining a Nigeria that is a nation with a narrative of victory and unity and achievement and promise. In that same moment, as you all witnessed, there emerged on social media other narratives, reminding us of how Toby and other athletes suffer repeated mistreatment by national sports officials and the national government, and how it is that often they must leave the country to successfully hone their talent in order not to, literally, not to die, right? So these narratives emerged, sort of vitiating and mitigating our joy in that moment. And I think all narratives, to begin with, I want to say that all narratives should be welcome at the table if we're imagining a Nigeria with a national narrative. I think all narratives are important for crafting a positive future. And I think not all narratives, no narrative rather, should be discounted, but should be seen as important signifiers of issues that need to be addressed. Recently, too, perhaps last week or so, a few days ago, there was this video also trending about a LASTMA official in Lagos, harassing this young gentleman who was wearing, according to him, looked like a Yahoo boy because he was wearing a chain. We were incensed, and there was outrage about how an ordinary citizen, because that who was simply get to wherever his destination on that fateful day. And the reason why I bring this forward is that while we remember that the Nigerian government failed people, athletes like Toby Amocho, there are also narratives about how we as citizens basically fail one another and signal that whatever solutions we will be drafting must be multi-level, multi-sectoral, and basically must suffuse the entire society. And so the third process I wanted to signal, as I mentioned by others, the jackpot syndrome. Every Nigerian is jackpotting, it seems. But again, there are two sides to this narrative. It is true, today, studies have shown that between 60, a conservative statistic, and 90% of Nigerian young people, if they had the opportunity, would jackpot, that is, leave the country to find their fate elsewhere, right? But the reality shows that in that country is still hundreds, literally, of millions of Nigerians that are going nowhere, that have not planned to go anywhere, and really are deserving of respect in this narrative, right? But the narrative of those who are willing to emigrate is also not necessarily negative, because I study migration and post-migration, and one of the basic facts of existence around the world is that nations everywhere benefit from migration, either as nations sending people out as migrants or as nations receiving migrants who come to make the nation better. So these are narratives that become subsumed in emotions of the moment. This is where we are. And I think some of these examples signal to us two major problems. The failure of governance in this country, Nigeria, and the failure of what we often refer to as nation building. And I will focus my exploration on these two tracks. The failure of governance has been so well described by Hajiya Saudatu and Moki Makura, who spoke before me, that why we do admit that the state, the Nigerian state, has failed. That is just one narrative. I think sometimes the problem is because we conflate what the state should be and do with what nation building should be about and do. The state is, as we know, merely a legal and political entity. For us in political science, it's an abstract, really. Because if you say, where is the Nigerian state? It's not as if you can touch a balloon somewhere, but we know that it's located on a territory, right? It's a theoretical construct made concrete by the existence of law and political action. It is a reference to the combined political authority of members of a geographical territory exercising sovereignty over their own affairs and willingly entering into relations with similar socio-political entities. States emerge in so many ways, and I think the emergence of states eventually lead us to what must be done about nation building. Theories about the emergence of states tell us that states emerge either by divine right by social contract, or by force. By divine right, God made the state. And so the rulers and that political authority derive authority from God. I reject that as an explanation for the origin of the Nigerian state. God did not make the Nigerian state. It is an artificial entity that has become real to its inhabitants. The social contract is the other theory, which says that people in society come together and agree among themselves to have over them a government to manage their common affairs. They give responsibilities to that government, and that government returns to them certain benefits, welfare, security, and so on. Again, that is a dubious explanation for the origin of the Nigerian state. Perhaps this explains the state in other parts of the world where these theories came from, but not the Nigerian state. And there is the theory of force, that states around the world emerged by force in one way or the other. That is, some elements of society fought wars or basically commandeered territories and people into their into territories that became ruled by those who became either chosen or imposed their rule on others. History has taught us that states often emerge by force. The states of Europe, to some extent, drew on divine right to legitimize themselves at critical moments. And when the divine right theory failed them, they drew on the theory of social contracts to legitimize the emerging modern, in quote, states following the Treaty of Westphalia in the 17th century in Europe, by which states for the first time emancipated themselves from the power of the church and wanted to exercise sole political authority over their citizens. And so they found the social contract useful as a tool for building and strengthening their states. The theory of force was also necessary because beyond the social contract, Europe fought many wars, even up until the 20th century. The First World War resulted in the realignment and creation of many new states in Europe, basically created by force. And here in Africa, it was the brutal fists of colonialism that forcefully and arbitrarily drew the map of this continent, which till today we still use, that created the nation of Nigeria. Nigeria is not, did not emerge by social contracts or by divine right. It is an entity that was imposed by force, and that we then, through various nation building measures, are then obliged to create out of this conglomeration of people, of nations, a commonality that we seek. Nations are of a different character from states. They are forged usually by primordial links of origin, of language, of culture, of religion, or by common historical experience. They are sustained by strengthening of these links, by the polishing and burnishing of common experiences, by myth-making, NYTH, myth-making, by storytelling, by the construction of grand narratives, by consistent common practice, we create nations, by respective inclusion of the elements of that nation in its progress and development, by crafting large visions, grand visions for the future, and by taking intentional steps towards achieving those visions. States do not emerge, nations do not emerge or survive by force. However, the efficacy of a state's monopoly of the use of force can provide an appropriate environment for the achievement of nationhood, of nation building, and for its aims to come to fruition. So national narratives are powerful. These meta-narratives are a set of narratives that a nation constructs for itself to self-legitimize its experience, its existence, and its experience. And I think it is there that the objectives of the Yaradua Foundation and the Office of the Vice President teaming up with the UNDP to create this initiative is very, very important. The creation of nations elsewhere has indicated to us that this path is productive of what we seek as a people and as a nation. The United States constructed ideas of the American dream. They speak of the founding fathers. They have an organization called the Mothers of the American Revolution. They tell their children stories about the pilgrims that landed there. Here I'm currently speaking to you from Boston in the United States, one of the original 13 territories that formed the colonies that became the United States. And here in November, they will be celebrating Thanksgiving, a national holiday to celebrate their common history. You see, this country took all of its bloody origin, its ignominious repression of Native Americans, of genocide of the Native Americans, its ignominious history of centuries of slavery of the Black and African population and of others, took that terrible history and created out of it these beautiful narratives that not only Americans key into, but everyone from around the world who sees for themselves a future in that country, think about and want to be a part of, right? That is the power of narrative and of constructing national narratives. The US's dominance today in the world is not just about its massive economic, financial, and other resources. It is also a dominance of cultural resources, a dominance in using its soft power, its narratives, its culture, dress, movies, language, its arts to suffuse the imagination of other nations and states around the world. It's in its cultural diplomacy. It is in drawing people to its territory to take part in its education and thereby become indoctrinated into its ways of thinking about and seeing the world. These are the ways that nations construct a narrative and influence and dominance in the world. The United Kingdom recently, in the past couple of weeks, mourns the death of the Queen. And if you love her, or whether you love her or you hate her, the Queen was instrumental as a cultural symbol in maintaining the influence of the United Kingdom beyond colonialism around the world. Because when you look at it very critically, the United Kingdom is a very small country in so many ways, in influence, in economy, and in influence, really, because were it not for the existence of its post-colonial infrastructure of dominance, which the Queen represented, which the Queen assiduously worked at by creating the Commonwealth of Nations and maintaining strong ties among those post-colonial nations. I wonder what the United Kingdom would be today, 60 years after colonialism, right? Today, non-British colonies such as Rwanda are joining the Commonwealth Organization. The power of such power, cultural diplomacy, and grand narratives. Nigeria has tried to emerge a nation it consistently fails because the centripetal and field of course in this society, what we call our diversities, are greater than what unites us in terms of how we have allowed those diversities to tear at the seams of this country. We have attempted through legal and institutional measures to address these problems. We have instituted a federal constitution, which has failed because the tensions in society have twisted that constitution in a way that it is federal in name and is unitary in application, in implementation, in letter, and in spirit, actually. It's just federal in name. We have sought to create institutions to help us reconstruct this society. But these approaches seem to have failed. We have tried mobilization strategies, stretching from as principles and directive objectives of state policy, which were supposed to help us to evolve a national narrative and national bonds to keep that together, right? In the during the Buhari Jagan regime, there was war against indiscipline. That if we can have a common set of values about how we treat ourselves and our nation, then we would go forward. Even the Abacha regime had a war against indiscipline and corruption. Let's move away from the negativities, they said. And in name, we have done all of these things. The Obasanjo regime had its own war against corruption. Dara Akunyili, one of Nigeria's biggest heroines, if you ask me, when she was Minister of Information, instituted the Good People, Great Nation campaign. And that was supposed to help us emerge again, to mobilize people towards a new national narrative. Why have all this failed is what we should ask ourselves. And I think a lot of that has been analyzed by the speakers before me. We need to look inwards and ask about what needs to be done next. We are not the only diverse nation, and so I think there's a lot that Nigeria needs to do. The objectives of this forum are to initiate a process of national reflection to facilitate the engagement of all Nigerians in desire. And I want to say three things about this and close. One is that building a new national narrative must be about values. We need to recover and re-articulate positive values that we once shared that I think we have lost along the way. We need to upgrade and update those values to account for contemporary realities. We need to include to values, traditional values of hard work, honesty, respect, good neighborliness, include values of innovation, values of inclusivity in our national ethos. And we need to teach and train that systematically to this generation and the ones coming after it. And fourthly, I think as Nigerians, we should then invest in the future we want, in building the positive national narrative, in people, in leadership and followership alike, in institutions, and in our cultural tools, and in growing our soft power in the Committee of Nations. Who will do these things? It must be you and I, and the government and political leadership must be a significant part of this, because as we said, without that framework, all other efforts will fail. Organized civil society has a role to play. Social groups, the church, cultural associations have a role to play. But let me close by saying, by speaking to the Yaradua Foundation convening this table this morning, to say that our part as an organization in making this new national narrative possible must go beyond the jaw we are doing. Jaw is very important. Talking and creating a space for conversation and for dialogue. It's very important. That's one of the failures at the national level. We have had national conversations that have gone nowhere and ended nowhere. Perhaps organizations like the Yaradua Foundation doing this will take us somewhere. So what do you need to do further? Find and accumulate the existing positive narratives. And this must be intentionally done. Secondly, sponsor the deployment of Nigeria's rich artistic and cultural heritage to magnify, to disseminate, and to sustain these positive narratives. And I think the foundation, thirdly, can appoint cultural ambassadors for achieving this objective, giving them clear mandates. You see, the United Nations, which is a committee of nations, really, a committee of states on the global level, realizes the importance of this. So you have UN agencies that have ambassadors that use famous faces to project the message of their agencies, right? And some of our own Nigerian celebrities are some. So the Yaradua Foundation, with this wonderful objective, should appoint ambassadors for projecting Nigeria's new national narrative, I'll call them, to distinguish this directive, this direction, this trajectory from previous efforts, right? And I think, fourthly, we need to take the message to constituencies, both in the nation's capital as we're doing, and to communities far flung around the country. And five, you need to, as you have been doing, partner effectively with the media to mainstream, to sustain the new national narratives that you're sponsoring. I want to thank you all for listening and for having me.
Big thanks to Dr. Olajumoke Yacob Haliso for her historical perspectives on national narratives. So in order to answer that question or to explore some of the strategies that we can use to craft this national narrative, we're going into a panel discussion. And I will just introduce each of the panelists and they can come up to the stage. First up, we have Ojoma Ochai. She's joining us virtually. She is the Director of Arts, West Africa for British Council. She works with private and public sector partners in the UK and West Africa to develop and deliver programs that build skills, international and local networks, and the capacity to promote the growth and collaboration related to the potential of the arts sector and a creative economy between West Africa and the UK. She is also a fellow of the DeVos Institute of Arts Management at the University of Maryland, USA, and an associate of the Nigerian Leadership Institute, NLI. She provides support to multilateral agencies and has supported national governments like the Gambia, Jamaica, and Nigeria to grow their creative economies. Let's welcome her virtually. I hope she's okay, thank you. Up next, we have Ode Friday, who is Nigeria's Country Director for Accountability Lab. He earned a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of Abuja and has established the United Nations Youth Association of Nigeria chapter at his alma mater. This is aimed at exposing students to social justice issues as well as the ideals and principles of the United Nations. He was instrumental in establishing the Child Protection Information System database in Nigeria and supported stakeholders, including the Ministry of Women Affairs, in implementing the database across the country for 4 years. He has managed over 15 CPIMS assistants and trained over 500 child protection officers. His passion to strengthen the accountability in Nigeria motivated him to push for establishment of Accountability Lab Nigeria. This is the convener of the Integrity Icon Nigeria, currently funded by Ford Foundation. A big round of applause for Ode Friday as he takes the stage. Up next is Fatima Rilwan Ododo. She is a finance officer at the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation that assists with record management, bookkeeping, and payroll processing. She also provides administrative support to the Yar'Adua Foundation and received her bachelor's degree in computer science and minor mathematics from the American University of Nigeria, Yola. She graduated in 2020 as the valedictorian of her class, and she's also a Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation Merit Scholar. Please welcome Fatima Ododo to the stage. Up next is Uchenna Simon, popularly known as Prince UC Ingawa. He was born in Ingawa, LGA, Katsina State in 1987 and is a businessman and philanthropist. He's an alumnus of the University of Maiduguri and founder of Tagwaye Charity Foundation, CEO of Tagwaye Twin Communications, Tagwaye Multi-Investment Limited, and Ingawa Tadambo Integrated Farms Limited. He was the Katsina State Labor Room Governor representing Katsina State at the National Reality TV show in 2017 that produced the Green Century book. He is engaged in several national development projects that add value to national cohesion. He is a proponent and campaigner of patriotism. A few months ago, the Tagwaya Charity Foundation produced a movie called The Pledge. One of Uchena's favorite quotes is, "Some people are born to become Nigerians, and that's all. I am happy to be one of them, and I urge you all to be too." Please welcome him to the stage. Up next is Saudatu Hamu Aliyu. She is the managing partner of Hamu Legal, an innovative multidisciplinary law firm focused on providing legal advisory to early-stage and high-growth companies. She has extensive experience on corporate commercial transactions and the intersection of law, policy, and regulatory developments on business. With an in-depth understanding of the Nigerian legal system, she has advised clients locally and internationally on banking, fintech, real estate, energy, intellectual property, asset acquisition, and project financing. She headed the Amana initiative that was aimed at building trust and collaborations between youth and security agencies to curb election violence and insurgency in northern Nigeria. In recognition of her contribution to nation building and public impact at an early stage, she was selected as one of the 2016 Associate Fellows of the Nigerian Leadership Institute. She is also an alumni of the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance, University of Cape Town Emerging Africa Leaders Program, and has a master's degree in national security from Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C. Please welcome Saudatu Hamu Aliyu to the stage. Mark Amaza will be moderating this panel discussion. He is a development communications and policy expert with over 5 years experience in the development sector. He worked in the sustainability sector with a focus on energy access and circular economy, and consulted on political and economic risk analysis matters in Nigeria and West Africa for local and international organizations. He currently works as the Senior Communications Officer at IAGA Africa, a civil society organization that works on democratic governance and civil engagement issues in Nigeria and across Africa. In his current role, he is responsible for ensuring that strategic communication is at the heart of IAGA Africa's work with diverse stakeholders, communities, and target audiences. Mark is also a member of the strategy team for the Not Too Young to Run movement, which successfully advocated for constitutional amendments that lowered the age of eligibility for elective offices. Please welcome Mark Amaza to the stage.
Good afternoon. All right. So a lot of conversations have been happening here. Very vibrant around national cohesion, integration, building new national identity. And this panel will continue in that vein in having these conversations. And I'm here with a lot of esteemed people who have really achieved a lot in their respective careers, and also very passionate Nigerians, even from reading their bios alone, you can get a sense of that, but also from knowing a lot of them personally, which also puts me in a safe zone. If I fire them hot questions, I know that we'll settle privately later. All right, so I will start by with Uchenna. Let me open the panel with you. So having a lot of talk about national cohesion and how that can be used to instill a sense of belonging for all citizens of the country. How do you think we can work to ensure that Nigerians see themselves as one indivisible people?
Okay. It's afternoon already. Good afternoon, everyone. To that effect, I will first of all say, number one, forgiveness. forgiveness is a major factor in the deteriorating state of our disunity in this country. And how is that? Everybody here cannot offend me, and I will pick only 5 people and forgive them, and leave the rest as my enemy. So if you want to forgive people, you forgive them completely and genuinely. And if you don't want to forgive people, you make it very obvious that you don't want to forgive people. All right, now this comes to what is actually happening and what has happened. The Biafran War. Nobody in the Igbo land, you hardly hear Igbo people tell you or tell their children a history of, okay, there was a civil war that the Nigerian government, or rather the Nigerians, fought us. No. You'll only hear that the Hausas fought us. So I start to feel there is no way I would say I'm angry, I'm agitated about what happened to me. I know everybody here are involved. Then I'll single-handedly pick out a particular person and say, this is my main enemy. So if we want to forgive, you forgive people completely. And without it, without forgiveness, the foundation will as always be faulty. Secondly, national cohesion. Another factor affecting us is that we have never had a Nigerian president. We always have regional presidents. It's either we have a Hausa president, or an Igbo president, or a Yoruba president. We need a Nigerian president, a president that can see Nigeria as his constituency. And e.g., just like I said, we once had a president that there was a conflict in the Northeast, and he said, please, they should not be disturbing him about it, that na them, which means they are killing themselves. And recently the same happened, that a president feel that if unknown gunmen or whatever are killing people, they should sort themselves out. So if we can actually have a Nigerian president that feels whoever that dies in this country is his brother or his sister, so it appears that he is actually losing a family member. We need such president in Nigeria. Thirdly, I keep saying this, you cannot lead people you don't understand. You cannot lead people you don't know. If Igbos can say, "Enyim by enyi," I should be able to know what I can do to quench that agitation. If Hausa people can say, "Bamui, bamui," I should know what I should do to quench that agitation. But we keep having presidents that doesn't even understand the country, doesn't even understand the people they are leading. You cannot lead people you don't know. You cannot lead people you don't know their plights, their worries, whenever it arises. So, and we need institutions. We need leadership institutions where people are being taught how to govern this country. We should have an institution personally for leading Nigeria. People that are there, they will be taught what Nigeria is all about, how to lead these people, how divergent we are, and how we can come together and move forward. And the last thing I would say here is that our biggest problem in this country, our religious leaders and political leaders. There are no head of societies that I listen to like the religious leaders. People might not know it, but the havoc religious leaders are causing in this country is beyond what you and I can imagine. These are things they say just to draw people's attention. Some of them make these statements so that they can be important in their community, but not knowing the effect of their statement, the havoc it will cause. So I think if we can look into this, we will actually do so much in bringing our people together. And another aspect is the political leaders. You are in Kano State. You are campaigning that nobody should vote anybody that is not a Muslim. And after that campaign, what will you tell them when you go to converge for votes in the East? Will you tell them not to vote another person who is a Muslim? So I want Nigerians to understand the kind of games these people play so that we should know that it's for their own interest. Anybody that actually wants to lead this country peacefully and in a progressive manner should start to look at the advantage of our diversity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your very detailed answer. A lot of it is revolved around political leadership and the need to have a leadership that really looks at Nigeria as one, not try to divide into sections. Let me come to you, Saudatu. You're a lawyer, and you have do a lot of work with emerging technologies, especially as a lawyer of this generation. How do you think technology and social media can be used to promote national cohesion?
Thank you very much, Mark, for that question. First of all, congratulations to the foundation, UNDP, and all the efforts that have gone through developing this groundbreaking work, Imagine Nigeria. I think it's been phenomenal going through it as it cuts across almost all areas. But to go back specifically to your question in terms of how technology and social media can help with national cohesion, I was listening to the professor earlier, and she was telling a story. She started, I think, with a story. And when Hajiya Saudatu was also speaking, she mentioned the story about her grandfather and all the other narratives she's provided before. If we look at our demographic at the moment, who here doesn't have any social media platform on their phone? Who is on WhatsApp in this room? Just show of hand. Who's on Facebook? Who has TikTok? Clearly, all of us are connected with technology one way or another. So technology has integrated every part of our lives. And it is very pleasing and exciting to recognize the stories of success that comes not just from the use of technology, but the innovation that comes outside of Nigeria. Every day we see companies trying to democratize access to learning how to code so more people can be able to use technology to advance their skills or even provide services across the globe. We're seeing companies providing technology where your health records can be accessed wherever you are in the country. We're seeing technology companies using drones to provide access to emergency health needs, where ordinarily access to healthcare or access to medicine would have taken maybe 3 or 4 hours drive. So the innovation that exists is very visible. But bringing it back to the narratives and how social media has helped, will help in pushing towards cohesion for Nigeria. I think the main use for us in social media today, more often than not, has been to complain, to say what's not working, or to bash, amongst other things. But I think social media platform provides a very, very useful tool for Nigeria to promote and advance the narrative that is being projected in this groundbreaking work, and also the future we see for ourselves. I recall when Toby Emerson broke the national record, and we were all excited. It was really, really refreshing to be on the TL and see what was going on, because nobody remembered, oh, I am from the north, I'm from the south, I'm from the west. The whole essence and focus of the conversation on the TL that morning, and even a few days later, was how Toby was a Nigerian, how the Nigerian spirit was palpable. If we also go back and see the level of investment that comes to companies in Nigeria, because of the amount of innovation that they see coming out of the country, it's also a significant indicator that the future is here, and we have the talent, the skills, and those who will drive it. So when we come back to the use of social media and how it will drive cohesion for this country, I think we need to determine how we use social media as a people, how the government uses social media, and how businesses use social media to advance either their product. So as a people, we must decide, what do I want to communicate or advance in terms of Nigeria using my social media platforms? And as a government, do I see social media as a tool where the citizens continuously attack me, or do I see it as a tool that creates a level of transparency and connectedness between me and the people I govern? In the US, I think it was President Obama who launched the We the People petition campaign, where people continuously wrote, and there was significant level of feedback, including even recipes in the White House were shared. What that did was it sort of opened up the White House and humanized access to the president. Of course, it's impossible for the president to speak to 200 million of us every day. But how can we create a system where everybody is able to feel connected, the government is also transparent, and listens to its people? Because governance is not just only about doing and speaking, but it's more importantly about listening and taking action based on the feedback that you've received. And technology has more or less simplified this in a way that has never been before. And then as businesses, social media platform has given us an opportunity not only to market or engage with customers or clients within our immediate demographic, but it has more or less globalized whatever service we're providing. So for everything we're doing, we must act with a certain level of ethics, dignity, and within the confines of the law. Because at the moment we are in now, businesses are no longer limited to one geographical location, but they are more or less globalized, which is what's happening with the several businesses that are receiving significant investments in Nigeria, with our unicorn today, Paystack. Flutterwave is right on the way as well. And we have companies like All School trying to teach kids how to code, amongst other things. So for me, I see technology companies providing the level of platform that is required to not only advance Nigeria to where it should be, but really hammering on those issues this report highlights.
Thank you very much. I think we'll come to Ojoma, who is with us virtually. Okay, you work in the creative economy, and currently Nigeria is having its day in the sun in terms of how our cultural footprint around the world, our music around the world, even the artists that we don't think are so big are being listened to world over. We see a lot of times Nigerian food being explored by non-Nigerians, and so on and so forth. You know, this is basically we have never had it so good in terms of how much Nigerian culture is consumed beyond Nigeria. As someone who works in the culture economy, how do you think we can promote intercultural dialogue and use our culture and art to understand our diversity?
Thanks very much for that question. It's good to be here. Thanks to the team at Yaradua Foundation and the Vice President's Office and everybody else that has been involved in this. So you're right that we're having a real renaissance in terms of our arts and culture and creative economy. But if I take us back a little bit, the creative economy, the parts of our creativity that are seeing a resurgence are, I suppose, one expression, if you like, of the arts. Because even though the sectors are the same, film, music, visual arts, design, performing arts, some art is made just for the sake of it because somebody wants to express themselves, right? Some art is made for commercial purposes, the way that you will make, I don't know, whatever product and sell it. Some art is made for that, for economic purposes. Some art is made for social purposes to increase cohesion, as we're talking about. Some art overlaps 2 of these, some art overlaps 3 of these, and so on. So I think when we talk about this sort of commercial success of our art, it does give us the opportunity to showcase our expression that's unique, whether it's in terms of Afrobeat or it's in terms of the aesthetic of our film. It gives us a chance to say that and to show that. But when you're talking about art that's supporting intercultural engagement and intercultural activity, some of that art that's doing commercially well might be able to do that, but we need to understand the conditions that enable that to happen. And I'll explain what I mean. If art is going to create intercultural awareness and intercultural dialogue, it means that art has to be available to the general population, whether it's in terms of the capacity to create the art, so that it gives everybody that sort of level playing field in terms of the voice to say what they want to say, if they choose to say it through the art. There's also the part about consuming the art. And within each of those things, there are a number of factors. For creation of art, I'm not talking about high art, I'm not talking about the best film, but where are the platforms for our children to learn painting, drawing, music, dance in schools? If you're in a private school that's sort of middle income, high income, you're probably doing music and art. If you're in a public school in, I don't know, Gwagwalada or somewhere in Owerri, you're very likely not doing music or fine arts in school. So when we talk about creation of art and who gets to participate in this intercultural dialogue through art, you see that we're not equipping our children with the capacity that they need to create art, to say what they want to say, and engage audiences with the things that they have to say. So I think that fundamental ingredient is missing. And if we want to use art as a tool for this intercultural awareness and dialogue, then we have to go back to the foundations and ask ourselves, who gets supported to create art and to participate in the art? But also, who gets to see art? Again, if you haven't raised a child to listen to music or go to a play or read a book, then they're not going to pick it up in their adulthood, are they? I was reading, I don't know if Milky is still on the call, from ANF. I was reading a report from ANF that said something like only 10% or 15%, I can't remember the percentage, of young Africans read African literature. And it's just alarming. Like, if we're not even reading our own books, then where does our understanding come from of our cultures and so on? But I think it comes from that fact that children are not creating art, they're not attending artistic events, they're not participating in artistic things. Why do we think they'll pick it up when in their later years? So I think for me, the fundamental ingredients to use art, to do anything, has to come from universal participation in the arts to start with, fundamentally. Other factors that lead to this are the support for the arts. So you find that in many developed in quotes, and I use that guardedly, societies, governments see it as part of their responsibilities to fund and support artistic participation because they recognize that art cannot be something you participate in only because you can pay. It shouldn't be something that you participate in only because you have 1,500 or 2,500 to buy tickets to go and see a film in the cinema. It should be something that people are doing in school, in public spaces, and so on. So I think if we also have that public support, then we cannot expect that the art will suddenly become a tool to achieve this collective good. It might happen through the commercial products, but it happens almost as a sort of afterthought, because at the end of the day, the artists that we're seeing and that are creating in spite of the context where they find themselves. As a couple of people have said in relation to sports, it's the same thing where if you're going to succeed in film or music, you have to train yourself often, you have to find somewhere else to blow, and then you then get supported maybe by the government. If you look at the story of Nollywood, what we now know as Nollywood, it wasn't until, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, 25 years after the emergence of New Nollywood that we started to see articulation of government support. So fundamentally, to answer your question, Mark, I think it's about supporting people to participate in art. It's about supporting people to appreciate art. It's about supporting people to create art. That is the fundamental thing that needs to be in place if we're going to use art to achieve anything, much less intercultural dialogue.
All right, thank you. So we need to create more access to art even before we even have the conversation how we can use art to promote intercultural dialogue. That's a very, very key point there. Ode, so you do a lot of work around accountability with government institutions and public services through the Accountability Lab, through the National Integrity Icon Award, and so on. In your view, what are the steps government can take to rebuild trust within the citizenry?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. And thanks to the Foundation for this opportunity, and hi to the panelists as well. And good afternoon, everyone. For me, it's quite interesting. It is a quite interesting topic and question, very good question. One of the things we have looked at from the part of the Accountability Lab, and one of the programs we implement is called the Integrity Icon. Just going to link this to the National Honors, which the government also runs the program. We run this program called the Integrity Icon to celebrate honest government officials. And one of the things we have seen through that program is how this builds trust in the community. And one of them is, in 2019, the winner for the Integrity Icon project was a policeman. It was quite intentional. We went that route because we have seen a situation in our own context where citizens don't even believe a policeman. So if a policeman stops you on the road, you already have a pushback, which you're already expecting is going to give you ask for a bribe, or you want to give a bribe, and all that sort of thing. But in this context, we have seen a policeman in Akwa Ibom where he works, where he's able to build a relationship with his community in terms of once there's a problem in that community, people come to him because of the trust he has built with the community. And what we have seen, one of the underlying things we've seen there is the communication he has with the community, his openness, and his ability to engage almost at every time when there's a problem. So once there's a problem in that community, you find out the community members themselves are able to even fish out the people causing the problem. So for me, I think the Integrity Icon Project and other programs like the National Honors Program, which the government runs as well, we've seen ICPC also start the Integrity Awards and a couple of others, which I think is a good platform for where we can begin to encourage public officials, even citizens. We've seen in previous of our programs where we also celebrated a couple of people who have found money in the airports and returned to the government. It's interesting, on the flip side of it, one interesting thing we're still trying to battle, a conversation we're still trying to battle with, is where you find Nigerian citizens having a flip side of that. What this means is somebody returns money to the government or returns money that he has found in the airport. A couple of people still believe like you are stupid for doing that. So it's another thing of concern. But however, I think encouraging people of integrity, people who are honest, is an opportunity for which we can rebuild trust in the community and in our country at large. One thing I want to say, it takes trust to build trust. One of the space I work with as well, we also try to strengthen accountable systems by supporting accountable institutions. If you look at what has happened in the past as well, I'll talk about inclusive governance as another thing I have on my list. I'm not sure how many of us get to engage with the government in our own small ways in decision-making process. If you do that, please, can you identify? So yeah, this is one of the another thing which we think by also finding a way. Mark is also smiling. I'll probably make reference to the Not Too Young to Run Act and other bills. So Hajiya is also here for the gender bills. So if you find out these platforms have already established a system where all of us can participate in governance, where there's a fair system that we all can also engage in. If you find out the Not Too Young to Run Act, after it was signed, the government came out, well, let me call them the big boys in the National Assembly, had sat down to put the bill together, the Electoral Act. And if you find out a couple of political parties were selling forms for 100 million, I'm not sure what that means for the Not Too Young to Run Act, right? I'm not sure what this means for the gender bills that failed to pass. How do we also have equal opportunity for us in our society that serves us equally? So this is another challenge which I see in a situation. But in order to build trust, we've had those bills and those acts which are out there for us to engage. But it's also for us to also play that role of engaging effectively. It doesn't have to be at the national level, but it can also be at the grassroots level, at your communities, where you also have that opportunity to communicate with your leaders. Lastly, for me, it's the National Assembly. Again, what this means for us in my space, as well as strengthening or building accountable system and also trying to support trust in our community, is how do we also, like I mentioned earlier, is how we also engage in decision-making processes. Another clear example is constituency projects. Once we have those constituency, I was privileged to look through the national budgets for this year, the federal budget, and just go on the websites for Ministry of Budget and Planning. I think they have the national budget, and search for empowerment project. It will shock you. These are things you and I don't have our voices over. So we don't have a community where our voices are being heard. So this for us is building trust. So how do we ensure that in our community, when decisions are being taken or made, I probably need a road in my village. I can't go to my village because the roads are not too good. So you have to struggle, and it's just a problem. Another story for another day. For some other people, the healthcare systems are not working for them. But once you get into the national budget and constituency projects, how do your voices count? We don't even have a voice that counts for all of these processes, which I feel is another lapse for the lack of trust with government officials. So for me, I think creating that platform where we can have accountable institutions, strengthen accountable systems, and also have a situation where we can encourage people who do the right thing, and an inclusive governance process will be the right space for building trust in our communities. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ode. Fatima, okay. So as a young woman with your rich and diverse background and experience so far in life, how do you think this has helped shape your perspective on national cohesion or Nigeria?
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. So I want to start by introducing myself more. So I'm Fatima Ogechukwu Rilwan, because Ododo is a suffix acquired after marriage. So I'm Igbo from Igbeze North, Enugu State. And then for those that are familiar with the East, You should know that Enugu was once the capital of the defunct Biafra and also the heartland of the Igbo land. And for those that are not familiar with the East, you also be aware that there is almost a non-existence of Igbo Muslim, indigenous Igbo Muslim in the state. However, my father was born a Muslim and my mom a Christian. And this happened as because of his father who converted to Islam during the war. And then I will take us through the story of how it happened and how it actually shaped my perspective towards national cohesion. So my grandfather was in the northern part of Nigeria during the war, and then he met a friend in present-day Nasarawa State, Kefi, with name Malam Sambu. As at then, his name was Chukuma. So the friend helped him, because at that time, the clash between the Igbo and the Hausas was more, so he helped conceal his identity, and then also cured him of his recurring illness, which was epileptic seizure, using the using herbal concussion and some spiritual, I don't know what it's called. So when he was okay with himself, and then he became very interested in knowing the religion that cured him of his illness, and also was fascinated by Malam Sambo's way of life, and that led him to convert to Islam. After the war, all his family members thought he was dead because there was no traces of him. So he returned home and told them of his new faith and his new friend he met. And that also fascinated his family members, which led to their own conversion to Islam. So while growing up, I grew up in the midst of people who had different faith, different belief from my own. And some of them actually saw me as practicing a religion that is alien to the Igbo culture. Some were indifferent. However, some of them actually took us, accepted our family as just practicing a new religion, but we're still their relatives, knowing our indigene and our origin. This is not just about me and my religion. It actually boils down to how people look at other people's opinion and their choices. Because I've been in a situation when I go to market and then I see people, I go to buy stuff from Igbo women, and then I see them saying things like, meaning people should be looking at this woman before she steals here. So in their own thinking, they are seeing me as, okay, because I'm wearing long dress, fully covered, there is no way I will be Igbo or even understand the language. Not knowing that I do not just understand general Igbo, I'm fluent in my dialects. And then, so what I'm trying to say is this whole experience and background has shaped me towards knowing the importance of understanding people's choices and their own belief and ideology. Because I believe you can actually accommodate other people's perspective and their belief if it doesn't affect our right to exist or to even practice our own faith. And even aside from the freedom of choice and freedom of thought and conscience, it will actually be boring if we are living in a country where everyone has exact belief and exact way of life. Because personally, I like meeting people, I like interacting with Yoruba, Hausa. I'm even fluent in Hausa. I'm learning Fufu there. I'm also currently learning Yoruba. Thank you.
This is a really fascinating story. So, Uchenna, I know you also have a similar, might not be exactly the same story, but I know, like, based on your own personal experience, and also if you look at how Nigerian government has made many efforts in integrating Nigeria, integrating us as people, and we have many government policies and schemes, things like federal character, NYSC, we have sports festival that happens every 2 years. How do you think, based on that, these policies, how do you think they have been effective? And based on this, and also your own personal experience as someone who's from the East, but can actually pass for someone who's from the North, based on where you were born and raised and sound and all of that, how do you think achieve that national cohesion beyond the examples you gave earlier? If you can have that in 3 minutes.
The thing is that when you are from a particular part of this country, and probably your parents are from a particular part of this country, and you were born in another part of this country. What I want to actually say is that you have a supernatural power that nobody does. When you possess these potentials, some people don't know the advantage. And that brings me to the question you asked. NYSC, the initial idea of NYSC has been misplaced. There is so much corruption in NYSC, which the government itself needs to look into and start addressing those challenges. The idea of NYSC is for people from a particular part of the country go to the other end of the country, learn their culture, learn their language, learn their tradition, and come back to your own people, explain to them what you learned, how these people behave, their character, attitude, culture, tradition. But we end up having people being posted from, let's say, from Kasana to Enugu, and you see them walk their way back to Kasana, or walk their way back to Kano or Kaduna, somewhere closer. And you start to see people from, let's say, from Kaduna telling you what happens in Abia. You have never been there. You don't know these people. You start to hear something like, hi, those people in Abia, they eat human flesh. Do you understand? People from Abia will start to tell you, Kai, if you ever step your foot in the north, you will see where people are using dagger to kill people. That everybody has a dagger. Do you understand? So the only way we can change this narrative is when government look critically into NYSC. If you're posted from Kasana to Enugu, you must serve in Enugu. You must serve in Enugu. And I start to feel their primary assignment places. Youth corpers are being exploited, and there is nothing to write home about in the sense that they have nothing in return. So government should look into, if you are being sent to serve in Anambra State, the criteria of the government giving you certificate, or rather you passing out, should be that I can hear some atom of Igbo language in you. I should hear you speaking Igbo very well. I should hear you tell me some cultures you have learned in Igbo land. But the idea of youth service has turned out to be, okay, after school, let me be collecting the minimum wage. That's just the idea. People will redeploy, go back to their various states, and be collecting the allowance without doing anything. So government should look into this. NYSC is a serious factor to unite this country, but people don't know. NYSC is a factor that will make everybody understand each part of this country without being from that region. So, like I said earlier, NYSC idea has been misplaced, and that aspect should be looked into. My story, you once said, like I said, when you are an Igbo man and you were born in the north, or you grew up in the north, or rather you are a Hausa man that was born in Igbo land, you grew up there, you have so much potentials that a lot of people don't. And This means that you are one of the people that understand this country. You are part of the people that can actually tell the story of this country. The issue we usually have is that you will see people come to national TV telling Nigerian story. In Nigeria, you don't know. Telling a story of what happened in Maiduguri when you have never been in Maiduguri. And you always give reference to the books you read. No. I expect a Maiduguri man or somebody that has lived in Maiduguri tell me the story of Maiduguri. And that will, go down well with me. But telling me you read something, so what I'm trying to encourage here, mostly from the north, people from the north find it very difficult to go to the east or rather to the south generally. And that aspect should be encouraged. That particular part should be encouraged for people from the north to start getting acquainted with things that happens in the south. In this way, we'll be able to understand each other's culture and tradition. And like I will still go back to NYC. NYC is a major factor to achieve this. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Saudatu, so just building up on the previous conversation we had on how social media and technology can be used to integrate the country. What kind of specific policies or projects or ideas that around using digital technologies do you think can be used to achieve that?
In terms of policies?
In terms of reframing Nigeria's national identity, we talk a lot about Nigeria's national identity, how we often say we don't really have Nigerians. We have people who are first their ethnicity or their religion, and it also gives birth to kind of leaders we have who see themselves first as whatever ethnic or religious group they come from before they're Nigerians. How do you think we can apply digital transformation or technologies to achieve a new national identity, a collective national identity?
Okay, so like I said earlier, all of us rely on technology to receive and pass information as a starting point. So that is the baseline for us as a start. And now we have this fantastic report that we can begin to distill, not just in English, across several languages, to be able to disseminate it across the country until it becomes our ethos. This is what we want to achieve in terms of public sector capacity. This is what we want to achieve in terms of education. This is what we want to achieve in terms of health, amongst other things. But more importantly, this is what the future that I want to live in Nigeria, I want to build for Nigeria, I want to build for my grandkids, look like. But specifically in terms of the digital transformation you talk about, when we speak about digital transformation, we can't talk about it without highlighting innovation. And if you look at research base, and even particularly within the report, Nigeria ranks very, very low in terms of innovation. So there are specific systemic changes that we need to carry out as a country, or particularly within government, to be able to achieve this level of digital transformation. Number one, broadband deployment. Up till today, internet access is still a privilege. So until we're able to ensure that we've removed barriers to entry for telecommunications companies and other technology companies relying on this to deploy services, we're only scratching the surface. And still, when we speak about innovation, we always look at it only from a technology perspective. But no, innovation is how do we change the way of doing things in a way that meets where the society is now and that is better than the way it was being done before. So when we're engaging with people within government, how do we bring this thinking of innovation and agility and rapidness to them? How do we train public servants to just not see innovation as one of those things the cool and rich kids are doing, but as a way of transforming society? Believe it or not, more often, the challenge for most of the technology companies is not that they don't want to follow the rules, it's just that following the rules has become so difficult and complicated. And the rules have been designed at a time that technology has not been as abundant as it is now. So civil servants have been designed to think and function within a specific confines that have been written down by those who are not even within the system anymore. And fairly, I understand, once you're within the public sector, you must act within a certain rules. So it is important as a government, if we're thinking of innovation, we begin to invest critically in the capacity of our civil servants to understand this culture of innovation beyond just, oh, it's technology, but how do we become a more agile, rapid, and responsive government to move things along. When it comes to also education, how do we move away from this brick and mortar system of teaching kids within classroom on education? How do we ensure that wherever you are seated or wherever I'm located, like the level of the education I receive should not be determined by where I live? I did my primary school in Bauchi. I did my secondary school in Maiduguri. I did my university in Abuja. But I don't think today the primary school student in Bauchi will engage at the same level with the primary school student in Abuja or in Lagos, because the level of exposures of the people teaching them are completely different. So it comes back to this conversation on JAPA. Banks are losing staff. We must be able to create jobs that will pay people enough to motivate them to stay. I don't think people really want to uproot their lives and go and start from scratch somewhere. But if you do not see economic prosperity for yourself, it doesn't make sense to continue staying within that particular system. So it is important, I don't think, and these jobs will not only come from the tech companies, but we must be able to create a system where we've created high-paying jobs. We've created opportunity for people to see themselves ascending within a system, and we must ensure that the public sector is not only a bureaucratic institution, but it's one that encourages a culture of innovation, agility, rapidness, and is continuously interconnected with this Imagine Nigeria we're all thinking about.
All right. Thank you very much. I believe Ojoma is still online. Yes, so you made a point earlier on that without using it as a tool to achieve, to promote intercultural dialogue and to unite a diverse nation. But but how do you think also we can use creative practices such as very common in creative economy and creative sector to confront systemic inequities, support health and well-being of Nigerians, and to build bridges across differences after we have created that universal access, that is?
Thanks. So I think there are different models that have worked in different places. In terms of dialogue, the powerful art causes you to think. It causes you to engage, to challenge the assumptions that you have. It sparks conversation. So I think once we clear that barrier of who has access, we then start to talk about what that access enables and whether we're able to then do what it enables. So DK was talking about the sort of imperatives around respect, and you can't have dialogue, constructive dialogue with somebody that you don't respect fundamentally. And so there are also those underpinnings that need to be in place, and I think fundamentally one of those is respect. I think another thing is in terms of conversation, we say it quite blithely, like, oh yeah, it will spark conversation, but do we know how to converse? Hajiya Saudatu was talking about my way or the highway. You can't have conversation and dialogue if we're not open to challenging the assumptions that we hold. And art can create a channel, but it cannot overcome those fundamental things that we need to be able to do if art will do the things that it does. What I do know, though, is that art creates an entry point for many difficult conversations in a way that few things can. And so through music, we can challenge the sort of narratives of what we think about a place based on what they're showing through the music. Through film, you can create narratives in the way that I travel around Africa a lot for work. When you travel, you know, there's these assumptions about Nigerians, about how shouty we are, about how much jazz we do, about how big all our houses are, because of what Nollywood is feeding them. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it is what it is, right? What I am saying is that art does provide that entry point and it creates those narratives, but we then need to have the skills and the capacity to then converse and challenge perceptions for it to then do the things that it can do. We've talked about social media. At the moment, it's almost impossible to distinguish between what is the sort of digital economy and what is the creative economy. And in fact, there's a paper that was published by UNESCO earlier this year that looks at that phenomenon. Because when you think of things like social media, they all run on creative content, right? What is Instagram without pictures? What is TikTok without videos? All of those are creative content. And so I think you only need to look at the conversation on social media and the quality of conversation on social media. Is that, what culture already exists in terms of the way we behave and the way we speak to each other and the way we respect or not respect each other. Art can provide an entry point into overcoming that, but we need to be able to have those conversations because the art cannot fundamentally change a lack of respect if we're not open to having those conversations. So I would say, yeah, there are ways, and there's proven ways where, because of the narrative that the art carries, it opens the door for a conversation, but then we need to be able to take that to the next point.
All right, thank you very much. I think we're going to give an applause. Ode, so we talk about a lot of times you hear folks talk about a need for a new national peace-building architecture to heal those fractured wounds and achieve peace in our country. If you had the opportunity to design this architecture, what will it look like? And what do you think the specific goals will be? What will the specific goals be for you?
Well, if I have the opportunity, interesting. That's huge. But yeah, thanks again, good question. First thing I'd like to say, I also want to thank Hajiya for her remarks during her presentation that she talked about shared identity. And also for Diki, I think he's still in the house, he also talked about our diversity. One of the key things for me will be how do we collate people's voices in that structure. I mentioned inclusive governance earlier on. One of the gaps I think we have within the country is this situation where you're trying to set up a policy or you're setting an agenda, you don't capture people's voices. And that reflects clearly on what we have seen in counterterrorism situations. So there's a problem somewhere, you just jump in the room, let's go out and attack these people or wherever the bandits are and just, or sometimes you have to, for me, I feel a platform for me would be how do I put together policies or measures that ensures voices are being heard, to dialogue, to communicate, to gather intelligence in a room with a group of people. Key thing for me will also be how do we leverage on, we've talked about technology, we've talked about innovations. We have so many young people here. I still want to ask the question again. Have you had that opportunity to have a feedback or inputs in any security architecture or policies that are being designed, if you have? So you see some of these gaps still resides within how do we ensure, I think there's a new Police Act 2020, yeah. We're still learning and it's still improving, but I think there's still room for much more improvement in that, where we can also move from the previous ways of doing things to new ways of ensuring people's voices are being heard and designing tools or innovations that young, for me, peace building or solving a situation cannot be done outside. In a community where there's a problem, you have to engage with the people. the people are the first go-to, so you have to find a way to always have that. One of the things we've heard from the big boys, again, I call them the big boys, in the chambers, you hear them say it's a matter of national security. So you don't want to bring that to the public, but you have people who have innovative ways to address this issue. Another thing I also see that I probably would do is, yes, you have huge budgets around the world for security. Nigeria has had the highest budgets for security for how many years now? But you still have those challenges facing us. But how do we ensure that young people also have a voice? You want to give them a chance. You just have to find a way to give them the chance to have their voices, to have innovation into this process. For me, I think that's one of the things I think I will do. Another thing I probably would do is, sorry, 1 minute. So also, you also want to have that conversation in the room. There's a difference between the drivers of conflict and the root causes of conflict. You also want to have that conversation at every time. I'll give you an instance. Well, it's good to have government official or government agencies now having, what do you call it, Twitter spaces. One of the Twitter spaces I was with one of our colleagues from one of civil society, and we had questions. You wouldn't imagine at that Twitter spaces, it was more like shut down the opportunities for people to ask questions, send in your questions through the back door. You're not giving people that chance to speak up. So for me, I feel the government also, one of the things I put on the table is also to have that space where there's a feedback mechanism. You have to create that to also hear people's voices, what are the challenges, and continuous, town halls are not just designed for, campaign starts today or something. You have a lot of town hall happening now. But town hall, how do we have like town halls around these issues almost on a regular? So before the problem even happens, you already know you all know the solutions of the problem. You have people who have grievances. You want to hear them out. You want to hear them speak. You want to address the situation before it even escalates. But yeah, that's for me. I think I'll just stop here. The only goal I think for me on this, we can't keep reinventing the wheel. The national anthem says, for me, that is where I'm just going to draw the line. I want a country, the goal for me is a country where peace and justice shall reign. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ode. And I think Ode also set the stage for us to make this a little bit of a town hall. So I'm not just the ones talking at you, so have the opportunity to take questions from the audience. So we'll take, I think we can take about 3 to 4 questions. I can see hands are up already. Okay, there's 1 hand, 2, 3, and 4. I already have my 4. That was quick. So 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. Yeah.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Dr. Dayo Kusa, a conflict transformation strategist, political scientist, and former director, Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. When I was there 12 years ago, it was under the presidency, now under Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was hearing about peace architecture. I was not going to say anything, but having heard that, it pinched me, and I got to speak up. Has there been anybody here who has been involved in drawing up peace architecture? Maybe because I was privileged to be a director there. But there were town hall meetings. You can ask questions about the composition of those town hall meetings, whether they should be better democratized than they were. I cannot hold brief for that. But democratization is a continuous process, and people need to engage. Chinua Achebe said, I started to write when I looked at the shelf, and I did not see my story. So the Nigerian story needs galvanization of social media, of engagement with government, inclusivity, gender inclusivity. Apologies, Hajiya Sauda, she knows what I'm talking about. Engagement with the people with disability, PWDs, The creative industry needs to sharpen the content of those stories that we see and are exported. The broadcasting community needs to look more at the content, what we are pushing out to the rest of the world. Finally, we need to galvanize a national narrative. And this national narrative needs to include the youth, who are about 60% of our population. I thank you.
Okay, who else has a question? Okay, I'll come to you first, and then we'll just do 2 more because of time, please.
Oh, thank you very much, and then good afternoon, everybody. My name is Iweze Rose. I'm a consultant on environmental management and occupational health. I think moving forward, I think it is time that we begin to document the Biafran War, if it is not documented anywhere, so that we get the record straight. You know, coming from your conversation here, both of you, you know, you say you had an Igbo origin. I think you're speaking from a biased, you know, stand. You know, rather the last comment you made really balanced it. But I don't think there's any. My parents didn't tell me that Igbo, and Hausas are fighting us. But it was all about justice. And the same injustice is still reigning supreme right now in the government. I mean, they don't even bother to understand where these people are coming from. You talked about social justice is the only answer to this, to moving forward. If you're going to have a town hall meeting, there has to be justice put on the table. And inclusivity is very, very important. You need to bring everybody on board. People are agitating. The agitation in the southeast is different from the one in the north. That one is really, really politicized. At the end of the, you can see it's coming down now because, you know, people are just changing. You know, because we have to really get this record straight. I want to encourage the Yaradua Foundation to please do a documentation of the Biafran War. Because the first comment you made, a lot of young people here will now live with the impression that, okay, the Igbos tell their, I mean, the parents tell their children, Hausa people fought them. But it is wrong. And even talking about forgiveness, it is the Hausas that have refused to forgive the Igbos because they said that I don't know.
Sorry, can we limit this?
Okay, sorry.
We're running out of time.
Sorry, we need to get the record straight. Injustice has to be addressed. And there has to be a documentation of the Biafran War. And the history also should also come on board because if you don't know where you're going, where you're coming from, where you're going to becomes impossible. Thank you very much.
Please limit it to a minute because we're hoping for questions. If we're opening the floor to contributions, we won't leave here today. Questions, please.
Question, of course. All right. My name is Solomon Tosin Adetosui, and I am a final year student of History and Diplomatic Studies, the University of Abuja. And I've come here today to ask this question on history itself. What is the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation and other various civil society organizations doing to carve out a collective national history of our people? A history we could always fall back on as Nigerians, quotes and unquotes. And how can we relate these histories to the present generation of youths? That's my question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I think the last person was back there. Yeah, the one hands up, yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Pastor Nathan Onwukwisi. Actually, my question goes to the man at the extreme end by my left-hand side. You're talking of trust, which is one of the things required to integrate Nigerians and make us move freely with one another. Now, there is a reference you made on the policeman that actually showed forth good character within the society where he stays, and that made him to be able to carry people along. And that's what we need in Nigeria, where trust will be. For example, the policeman at the checkpoint, you're approaching him. Is there anywhere, is there anything that is being done, maybe from the government side, to be able to create an awareness or maybe give understanding to the police how to relate to an ordinary local uniform Nigerians? If we approach them, which way will the government do? What will the government do to be able to create that understanding in them that they are supposed to protect us and not to stand there maybe and use the instrument of the uniform to create another problem where there be no trust? I don't know whether you understand what I said. So that is my question. What is the government doing to be able to bring this understanding within that area? And then we Nigerians too, we and the civilians, so that trusts will be built among one another, both in the government offices. You are going to transact a business. I'm a businessman. So you go there to transact a business. You feel that there should be trust among one another. Where I approach you, you relate to me well, and then be able to give me chance for me to transact, carry out my business. So what is there anything the government in place is doing to be able to bring this understanding and make us relate to one another in trust?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll have Ode answer for the question on what the Yaradua Foundation is doing. I think Shayo will be best placed to answer that question. But have Ode answer that question. Also, in 30 seconds, give us what your personal vision of Nigeria should be or is, and we'll do that and run and finish up this panel.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I was just thinking like he's coming with this hard, difficult question I can't answer. But yeah, one of the things permits me to say this, I actually penned this down. Back, I'm not sure if it was 2019 or 2020 when the government came up with the Change Begins With Me campaign. That is what the government is doing. But sustainability on another side is another conversation for another day. We've had the Ministry of Information who had run that campaign for a while. But yeah, we still expect to support them. That's why I also mentioned other campaigns. The ICPC in 2020 as well put up a policy called the National Ethics and Integrity Policy. But another concern I have basically is, I'm not sure if it's my colleague, my brother that mentioned, we are 200 million Nigerians. Sometimes the campaign doesn't get to the grassroots, doesn't get to where it's supposed to get to. So we need to do more work. Other colleagues from other organizations like Clean Foundation and NOPRIN, they also conduct trainings for police officers on ethics and integrity as well. So I think there are a lot of programs going on from the government, but yes, we'll keep supporting them in ways we can to improve on the ethics and trust building in police.
So in 30 seconds, your vision of Nigeria. This is how we're going to close out this panel. So you open the door for us, open the floor.
My vision for Nigeria is not difficult, actually. So every day I go around, it's just difficult having to deal with people, because we also have to engage people almost every. Driving down is a problem in Nigeria. But my vision for Nigeria is a country where people do the right thing. But I still ask myself, what is the right thing to do? But that narrative has to be developed as we reimagine Nigeria to ensure people know the right thing. We talked about history, we talked about a couple of things. But yes, in Nigeria where people are active, responsible, and institutions are accountable. Thank you very much.
So once again, my vision for Nigeria is having a country where we will develop, we will learn to develop and respect other people's culture. And in that way, we will project this view to other countries that we have developed, rich, diverse culture. And this could even end up being as a tourist center and even as a revenue to the country. If other people see us as, okay, we are diverse and developed, just like other heterogeneous countries, like China and India.
Well, I hope, and I'm very hopeful, that we will have a Nigeria that will face reality. All of us will face reality and let go our emotions. Thank you.
I think my dream for Nigeria is one in which there is an increased level of trust between the people and the public institutions, because I feel at the moment we're at a level where public trust is at its greatest low than it's been ever.
And Ojoma, don't worry, we have not forgotten you.
So my vision for Nigeria, I'll take the quotes from the Imagine Nigeria report of one of the respondents that said, I want to fall in love with Nigeria. I want Nigeria to give me reasons to fall in love with it every day. And please, God, can Nigeria love me back? That's my vision.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very vibrant conversation. And thank you very much for being part of it. So.
Mark, keep your team, please. Okay. I have been given the privilege as a keynote speaker to respond to two things. The first thing is I'm a bit down because we came into this room hoping to begin a line of engagement that helps us to open up ourselves in an honest, transparent, and deliberate ways. And I like what Uche said. We must divorce ourselves from emotions. So far, they have led us nowhere, and they will not lead us anywhere. I also said at the end of my presentation, we must commit to leave pain behind, look forward to gains of forgiveness, of purposefulness. For goodness sake, 1969, 67 to 69 is a bad chapter in our history. Nobody denies that. Everybody has paid a price for that space of time. People like me should not be here talking to you. Your mom may not have told you what Uche said may have been told to another family. But because we harbor these things in our hearts, and because we have failed to let go, those of you who might have had the chance of going through therapies or, because we're all traumatized. Didn't I say so this morning? We're all traumatized. Some of us have had the opportunity of going through trauma counseling. The first win in a trauma counseling is to do what? Please, those of you, to let go. To let go. It's not as if the United States or the people, which people were quoted, did not have issues. Every nation has had issues. Why must our own remain in our cupboards? Please, let's bring it out the same way we have brought out violence against women and girls in this country. I plead because, again, thanks to Shehu Eradua and the Office of the Vice President, I see almost 70% in this room as the Gen Zs of Nigeria of today. I'm not sure I have a mate in this room except for Polly herself. So my sister there, yes, doctor. But you see, the aspiration I have is that my son, you, my daughter, my granddaughter can begin. And that's why I felt pain when I was presenting. That nobody is teaching the correct history to our children. We have abrogated the learning of history in our, they do social what? Social studies, I know it is called, but the way they even pronounce it is so offensive. Do you get what I mean? So that's one. The second thing is we've spoken to forgiveness. See, God himself forgives all of us. We go to church, we go to mosques, we ask for forgiveness. And like Bill Clinton said after the Monica Lewinsky issue, I don't know how many in this room were very familiar with it. A president of the United States of America was accused of illicit behavior with an intern. I think she was an intern. He almost went in for a, what do you call it? Impeachment. At the end of the day, having gone through the rigor of systems and institutional checks and investigations, America decided to forgive him one way or the other. Don't worry how they did it. And on the last day of the conversation, he was going into the White House from the Rose Garden. And a journalist asked him, he had already turned, and that journalist asked him, Mr. President, have you forgiven Americans? And he turned and said, you know Bill Clinton with words. He turned and said, I cannot ask for what I cannot give. Americans have forgiven me, I have forgiven them. And that closed that conversation. Nobody ever went back to, why did they not impeach him? Nobody went back to, what happened to Monica Lewinsky? She's history. Let our pains be history, for goodness sake, in this country. Let our pains be history. We can't move. We can't move forward. Nigeria is a country, I don't know, DK always takes my heart when he speaks. I have never seen what he told me today about River Niger, and I will hold it fast. It tells me the uniqueness of Nigeria. Every economic policy of the world doesn't work in Nigeria, but yet our economy grows and stalls. So we are unique. Please let's extend our uniqueness to our capacity to let our pains go, to move forward. Those of you in the bracket of 20 to 25, you have a long haul. If you want to continue this route, I'm sorry for you. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Hajiya Saudatu, and a big thank you to our panelists. Please, you may return to your seats. We're fast spent on time, so I'll just go quickly to the representative of the UNDP to give his closing remarks. He'll be joining us virtually. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. I would like to thank all those involved in the organization of the event, the speakers and the panelists, as well as those attending in person and online. A special thanks to you for Shehu Musa Yaredoa's Foundation, whose representative volunteered their experience and time to make this event happen. I would like to also commend the Nigerian government and all those involved in the design of the Imagine Nigeria report, especially those who attended the extensive consultations that took place in 2020 and 2021, for investing time and resources to develop this, which is to be a tool for building the country's future. I'd like to highlight that the event is just the beginning of what Imagine Nigeria aims to achieve, which is first to connect people and organizations around the country, second to foster their engagement in reflecting on the Imagine Nigeria recommendation and Imagine Great Future for the country, and third to take concrete action to achieve this Imagine future. UNDP has been supporting this participatory process since the beginning of consultation in 2020, when the world was witnessing the beginning of one of the most devastating public health and socio-economic crises of the last century. UNDP has gladly supported Imagine Nigeria as the exercise is proof of the country's audacity and foresight to call for a rethinking and national reflection on the future and set today the condition for an increasingly better future for the people, which is in line with both UNDP's global mandate and its cooperation framework with Nigeria. UNDP has published a request for proposal directed to innovation hubs located in each of the geopolitical zones in Nigeria to convene Imagine Nigeria event, such that this one represents zones aimed at building a culture of innovation. The request for proposal also include mapping the innovation ecosystem in Nigeria and designing an exchange platform for facilitating learning, promote collaboration, as well as link investors to innovators in all areas of the Nigerian society. UNDP will continue to offer its global experience and the capacity to support the government and the people of Nigeria in their efforts to achieve sustainable and inclusive human development. I'd like to invite people to visit Imagine Nigeria's website, www.imaginenigeria.org.
Okay, it appears we've lost our speaker, so we thank the
No,
UN. Okay, oh.
I have completed. I have completed.
Sorry, welcome back.
Hello?
Hello, sir. You may continue your remarks. Thank you.
No, I have completed. You mean?
Thank you so much, sir. All right. We appreciate the UNDP for the support that they are giving to the Nigerian government in crafting this national narrative. Our time is fast spent, and I'd like to thank every one of you for joining us today. However, there is still an exhibition for Shehu Musa Yar'Adua, A Life of Service. The exhibition is located outside the hall, so we would invite you while you are going for lunch to tour the exhibition in batches. For the panelists and speakers, we invite you to please use the front exit here so that you can go take your lunch, and then the rest of us should use the back. Thank you everyone for coming, and God bless Nigeria.